She stood on that auction block with her babies clinging to her skirts, watching strange men bid on her children like they were livestock. The auctioneer's gavel was about to fall, about to rip her 7-year-old son from her arms forever, when a dusty cowboy pushed through the crowd and spoke 5 words that would change everything. "I'll take all 4 of you." This is the story of Marina Doyle, a mother who lost everything, and the man who gave her a reason to believe again. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The August sun beat down on the town square of Lawrence, Kansas territory with the kind of merciless heat that made even the stones seem to sweat. Marina Doyle stood on the wooden auction block, her hands trembling as she tried to smooth down Clara's wild auburn curls one more time. The little girl, only 5 years old, pressed her face into her mother's worn calico skirt, her small body shaking with silent sobs she was trying so hard to be brave about. "Mama," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing murmur of the crowd. "I'm scared." Marina's heart cracked a little more, though she hadn't thought there were any pieces left to break. She crouched down, ignoring the auctioneer's impatient cough behind her, and cupped her daughter's tear-stained face in both hands. "I know, sweet girl, I know." Marina's voice caught, but she forced herself to keep going. "But you remember what I told you? No matter what happens today, no matter where any of us go, we carry each other right here." She pressed her palm gently against Clara's chest, right over her heart. "You feel that beating? That's where Mama lives. That's where Elias and Jonah live. Nobody can take that away." It was a beautiful lie, and they both knew it. 7-year-old Elias stood beside them, his jaw set in a way that made him look far older than his years. His father's eyes stared out from his young face, those same green eyes that Marina had fallen in love with 9 years ago, before the cholera took James, before the debt swallowed everything they'd built, before their whole world came crashing down around them like a house made of cards. "I won't let them take Clara and Jonah, Mama," Elias said fiercely, his small fists clenched at his sides. "I won't." Marina pulled him close, breathing in the little boy's smell of him, sweat and prairie grass and the lye soap she'd scrubbed him with that morning, wanting him to be clean for whatever came next. "Oh, my brave boy, my sweet, brave boy." 3-year-old Jonah didn't understand what was happening. He sat on the edge of the platform, his chubby legs dangling over the side, playing with a wooden horse that his father had carved before the fever took him. The paint was worn off in places where Jonah had clutched it through long nights, but the little boy still galloped it through the air, making soft neighing sounds and living in a world where auction blocks and debt collectors didn't exist. "All right, folks, settle down now." The auctioneer, a florid man named Simmons with whiskey on his breath and greed in his eyes, stepped forward and rapped his gavel against the podium. "We've got ourselves a fine offering here today." Woman, age 26, good health, knows her way around a kitchen and a laundry. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Marina closed her eyes. Not children, not offerings, not lots to be divided and dispersed, but that's what they were now. The law saw them as property, as assets to be liquidated to pay off the debts James had left behind. Debts she hadn't even known about until the creditors came calling 2 months after she'd buried her husband. The crowd pressed closer. Maybe 40 or 50 people packed into the square. Some were genuinely looking for household help or field workers. Others had come for the spectacle, for the entertainment of watching someone else's tragedy unfold on a hot summer afternoon. Marina recognized some faces from town. Mrs. Patterson, who used to buy eggs from her. The Johnsons, who'd shared their church pew. Now they all stared up at her with expressions ranging from pity to calculation to something that made her skin crawl. "Now we're going to start with the woman," Simmons announced, consulting his notes. "Marina Doyle, widowed. The estate's creditors have authorized me to sell her contract of indenture for a period of 7 years to satisfy outstanding debts in the amount of—" "What about the children?" a voice called out from the crowd. Marina's eyes snapped open, searching for the speaker. It was a man in a brown suit, prosperous looking, with cold eyes. "Are they included?" Simmons shook his head. "Children will be sold separately after the mother. Now, if we could proceed—" "No." The word tore from Marina's throat before she could stop it. She lurched forward, putting herself between the auctioneer and her children. No, you can't. You can't separate us. Please, I'm begging you. Mrs. Doyle, we've been through this. Simmons' voice carried a warning edge. The law is clear. The debts exceed. I don't care about the law. Marina's voice rose, high and desperate. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. They're babies. They're babies. Elias is 7 years old. Clara still has nightmares. Jonah... Her voice broke. Jonah doesn't even remember his father. I'm all they have. Please, please don't do this. The sheriff, a heavy-set man named Garrett, stepped onto the platform. His hand rested on the pistol at his belt, not threatening exactly, but making his presence known. Ma'am, you need to compose yourself. This is difficult. I know, but the law. Damn the law! Marina's eyes blazed. She knew she was making it worse, knew she should stay quiet and submissive and hope for mercy. But the thought of watching her children dragged away to separate fates, she couldn't breathe. She actually couldn't breathe. Her chest felt like it was being crushed by an invisible hand. Elias grabbed her skirt. Mama, don't. You're scaring Jonah. She looked down and saw that it was true. Jonah had dropped his wooden horse and was staring up at her with huge, frightened eyes, his lower lip trembling. Clara was crying in earnest now, great hiccuping sobs that shook her whole body. Marina forced herself to take a breath, then another. She sank to her knees on the platform, gathering all 3 children into her arms, holding them as tightly as she could. This might be the last time. This might be the very last time she ever held them all together. I love you, she whispered fiercely into their hair. I love you more than the sky, more than the stars, more than every breath I've ever taken. Don't you ever forget that. Don't you ever... Mrs. Doyle? The sheriff's voice was gentler now, but firm. It's time. 2 men stepped forward to help her to her feet. Their hands weren't rough, but they were insistent. Marina stood on shaking legs, still trying to keep herself between her children and whatever came next. Let's start the bidding at $50, Simmons called out, his gavel raised. $50 for 7 years of contracted service? Do I hear 50? $50. A woman near the front raised her hand. Marina recognized her, Mrs. Thornhill, who ran a boarding house on the edge of town. A decent woman, by all accounts. Marina felt a small flutter of hope. If she could be close to town, maybe she could find a way to... 60! Another voice, male this time. 75! 80! The bids came faster, and Marina watched in a daze as her worth was calculated in dollars and cents. 85. 90. 100. The numbers climbed, and with each one, she felt more like an animal at a cattle auction, being assessed for her working capacity and years of useful service. $125! Mrs. Thornhill's voice rang out clear and determined. $150! The man in the brown suit again. Something about him made Marina's stomach turn. She'd seen men look at horses that way, evaluating, possessive, already imagining ownership. Going once at $150, Simmons intoned. Going twice? Wait! Elias's voice, high and clear, cut through the proceedings. The 7-year-old had stepped forward, standing at the very edge of the platform. His face was pale, but resolute. You can't just sell our mama. What about us? What's going to happen to us? A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others shook their heads at the interruption. Son, you need to step back, Sheriff Garrett said, not unkindly. This is adult business. I'm not your son, Elias said, his voice trembling but defiant. And it's my business if you're taking my mama away. Who's going to take care of us? Who's going to... The children will be placed appropriately, Simmons said with forced patience. Now, if we could... You're going to sell us too, aren't you? Elias's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but his chin was up. Just like you're selling Mama. You're going to sell us to different people. You're going to split us up. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Simmons seemed at a loss for words. Finally, he cleared his throat. The children will be, The creditors have authorized separate sales to maximize the return on... No! Elias lunged forward, but Marina caught him. She pulled him back against her, her arms locked around his chest as he struggled. No, you can't. We're a family. We're supposed to stay together. Mama, Clara was screaming now. reaching for her mother as one of the sheriff's deputies moved to separate them. "Mama, don't let them take me, please!" Jonah, finally understanding that something terrible was happening, began to wail, a high, keening sound of pure terror that cut through Marina like a knife. The crowd was getting restless now. Some people were calling for the sheriff to restore order. Others were shouting questions about the children. The whole thing was descending into chaos, and Marina stood in the center of it, feeling like she was drowning while everyone watched. "Enough!" Simmons banged his gavel repeatedly. "Sheriff, please remove the children from the platform so we can proceed." "No!" Marina screamed. She wrapped her arms around all three children, trying to shield them with her body. "No, please, just give me a minute. Just one more minute. Ma'am, you're only making this harder." The sheriff reached for Elias, and Marina's hand shot out, grabbing the boy's arm. "Don't touch him! Don't you dare! Mrs. Doyle, I'll work double, triple. Please, there has to be another way. Whoever buys my contract, I'll work twice as hard. The creditors want cash, not promises," Simmons said coldly. "Now, can we please?" "I'll take the boy," the man in the brown suit called out. He'd moved closer to the platform, and now Marina could see his face clearly. There was something hungry in his expression that made her blood run cold. "Strong-looking lad. I could use help on my farm. How much for him?" "No," Marina whispered. "No, please." "We'll auction the children separately after the mother's contract is settled," Simmons said. "Now, we had a bid of $150. Do I hear $175? Mrs. Thornhill again, her face tight with sympathy but also calculation. She was running a business, after all. $200! Marina's vision was blurring. She couldn't tell if it was from tears or from the suffocating panic that was making it hard to draw breath. She pressed her face into Elias's hair, trying to memorize the feel of him, the smell of him, knowing that in a few minutes, $250! The man in the brown suit was looking directly at her now, and Marina wanted to be sick. "Going once at $250, Simmons said. Going twice. Wait!" A new voice, deep and rough, cut through the noise. "I got a question before you finish this." The crowd parted, and a man pushed his way through to the front. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of weathered, sun-dark skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His clothes were dusty from travel, worn canvas pants, scuffed leather boots, a faded blue shirt rolled up to reveal corded forearms. A wide-brimmed hat was pulled low over his eyes, shadowing his face, but Marina could see a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. He moved with the easy, rolling gait of someone who spent more time in a saddle than on his feet. And as he came closer, Marina noticed his hands, scarred and calloused, the hands of a working man. A gun belt hung at his hip, the holster well-worn but the weapon clean and cared for. "And you are?" Simmons asked, irritation clear in his voice. The stranger stopped at the edge of the platform, tilting his head back to look up at them. For just a moment, his eyes met Marina's, dark gray, like storm clouds, with something unreadable in their depths. "Calder Rhodes," the man said simply. "I'm a horse breeder, got a ranch about 15 miles north of here, and I got a question about your auction." "This isn't really the time. You're selling them separate," Calder said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made people listen. "The mother and the children, that right?" Simmons sighed. "Yes, that's correct. The estate's creditors require—" "How much?" The auctioneer blinked. "I'm sorry?" "How much?" Calder repeated slowly. "For all 4 of them." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Marina's breath caught. She stared at this stranger, this man who'd appeared out of nowhere, trying to understand what he was asking. "All 4? Simmons looked taken aback. "Well, The mother's contract is currently bid at $250. The children would be auctioned separately, so I couldn't say—" "Take a guess," Calder said. His hand rested on the platform's edge, relaxed but somehow commanding attention. "You're a numbers man. You know what they'd likely bring separately. So tell me, what's the total debt?" Simmons consulted his papers, his fingers trembling slightly. "The estate owes $412, but if we sell them separately, we could likely exceed that amount. The boy alone might bring—" "I'm not asking what you might get," Calder interrupted. I'm asking what the debt is. 412? Plus the auctioneer's fee, which is 10% of, so about 450, give or take. Calder's eyes hadn't left Marina's face. That cover everything? Pay off every creditor? Clear the whole debt? Well, yes, I suppose it would, but then here's my bid. Calder reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. He loosened the drawstring and poured a stream of coins onto the platform with a heavy clink of metal on wood. Gold coins glinted in the afternoon sun. $500, cash, for all 4 of them, the mother's contract and all 3 children. The crowd exploded into noise. People were shouting questions, pressing forward to get a better look. Marina's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst right out of her chest. She clutched her children tighter, afraid to hope, afraid to even breathe. Now hold on! The man in the brown suit pushed forward angrily. You can't just... The children haven't even been offered yet. I had a bid on the boy. And I'm making a bid on all of them, Calder said calmly. Before they're split up. That's legal, ain't it? He looked at the sheriff. Man can make a bid on what's being sold, can't he? Sheriff Garrett looked uncomfortable. Well, technically, I suppose if the creditors would accept... The creditors want their money, Calder said. I'm offering more than they're owed right here, right now. Gold coin, no promises, no payment plans, just cash. But the proper procedure... Simmons was floundering now, looking between the money, the crowd, and the sheriff. The proper procedure is to satisfy the debt, Calder said. There was steel beneath his calm tone now. That's what this is about, isn't it? Collecting what's owed? Well, I'm offering to clear the whole thing in one transaction. Seems to me that's the best outcome for everyone. It's irregular, Simmons protested. But is it illegal? Calder pressed. Because if it's just irregular, I don't really give a damn. Those creditors want their money or not. Simmons looked at the gold coins. $500 was a substantial sum, more than he'd expected to get from the 4 sales combined. The creditors would be satisfied and he'd get his percentage either way. After a long moment, he deflated slightly. I suppose I could send a runner to the primary creditor, get authorization, but I can't promise. You've got authorization right there, Calder gestured to the coins. That's more than enough to cover every debt and then some. What's left over goes to her. He nodded at Marina. For her and the children to start over with. Marina couldn't speak. She physically couldn't make words come out. This stranger, this man she'd never seen before, was offering to buy her freedom and keep her children with her? It couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen, not in the real world, not to women standing on auction blocks watching their families get torn apart. Why? The word finally forced itself past her lips, barely more than a whisper. Why would you do this? Calder's eyes met hers again, and for a moment everyone else seemed to fade away. His expression was serious, honest, with something in it that Marina couldn't quite name. Because it's wrong, he said simply. Selling folks off separate when they belong together, it's wrong. I don't care what the law says. I don't care what the debts are. Some things are just wrong, and this is one of them. But you don't even know us, Marina said. Tears were streaming down her face now, though she barely noticed. We're strangers to you. Why would you? Don't have to know you to see that those babies need their mama, Calder said. And you need them. That's plain as day. So here's what's going to happen. He raised his voice, addressing the whole crowd now. I'm buying their freedom. All 4 of them. I'm offering enough to clear the debts and then some. And then I'm taking them to my ranch where they'll have a roof over their heads, food in their bellies, and nobody's going to separate them ever again. That acceptable to everyone? I want the boy. The man in the brown suit tried one more time, his face red with anger. I had a bid on... You don't get the boy, Calder said, and now his voice had gone cold, dangerous even. He turned to face the other man fully, and Marina saw his hand drift unconsciously toward the gun at his hip. You don't get any of them, because I just bought them all, unless you want to outbid $500 in cash? The man in the brown suit glared but said nothing. Clearly, he didn't have that kind of money. Anyone else? Calder looked around the crowd. Anyone else want to outbid me? Because I'll wait. But if not, let's get this done so these folks can get off this platform and stop being gawked at like animals. Simmons looked at the sheriff. The sheriff looked at the coins. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "I think we can make this work," Sheriff Garrett said. "The debt gets paid, the creditors are satisfied, and—" He glanced at Marina and the children, and something like relief crossed his face. "And the family stays together. I'll stand as witness that this was done legal and proper." "Fine," Simmons threw up his hands. "Fine. Let the record show that Calder Rhodes purchased the contracted servitude of Marina Doyle and custody of her 3 minor children for the sum of $500 to be paid in full immediately. Does anyone contest this sale?" The crowd was silent. Even the man in the brown suit had slunk back, muttering under his breath. "Then it's settled." Simmons banged his gavel. "Sold to Mr. Rhodes." The words echoed in Marina's ears. Sold, but not separated, not torn apart and scattered to different corners of Kansas territory. Together. They were staying together. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if not for the sheriff's quick hand on her elbow, steadying her. Elias was crying now, great shuddering sobs of relief. Clara had buried her face in her mother's skirt, her whole body shaking. Even little Jonah seemed to sense that something important had happened, clinging to Marina's leg with both arms. Calder climbed up onto the platform, and suddenly he was right there in front of her, even taller up close. He smelled like leather and horse and open prairie. His expression was unreadable as he studied her and the children. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Marina tried to answer, but nothing came out. She tried again. I don't understand why." "Don't have to understand it," Calder said. "Just have to accept it. Can you do that?" She nodded, still not quite believing this was real. Calder crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with Elias. The boy looked back at him warily, his face streaked with tears, but his jaw still set in that stubborn line. "What's your name, son?" "Elias," the boy said. "Elias Doyle. And I'm not your son." "Fair enough," Calder said, not taking offense. "You got any brothers or sisters besides these two?" "Just Clara and Jonah." Elias moved protectively closer to his younger siblings. "And our mama. We stay together." "That's right," Calder agreed. "You stay together. That's the whole point of this. I'm not splitting you up. Your mama's coming with us. Your sister and brother too. All 4 of you together. Understand?" Elias studied him suspiciously. "Why? What do you want from us?" It was a disturbingly adult question from a 7-year-old, and it made Calder's expression tighten for just a moment. "Fair question," he said after a pause. "Here's the truth. I got a ranch about 3 hours' ride from here. It's a decent spread. I breed horses, raise a few cattle. I do all right. But it's a lot of work for one man, and my housekeeper died this past spring. Place is falling apart without someone to manage the house and the garden and the cooking. Your mama's going to work for me, not as property, but for wages, fair wages. And you kids will have a home, food, and a safe place to grow up. That's what I want. Help running my ranch, and in return you get security. Sound fair?" Elias looked at his mother, uncertainty in his eyes. Marina was still trying to process everything, trying to find the catch, the hidden trap in this stranger's offer. But there was something in Calder Rhodes's face, a straightforward honesty that was hard to fake. "What about after 7 years?" Marina finally found her voice, hoarse but steady. "The contract, after 7 years you're free to go wherever you please," Calder said, standing back up to face her. "Or stay if you want. That'll be your choice. But either way, your wages will be your own. I'll pay you what I'd pay any worker, $2 a week plus room and board for you and the children. And before you say that's too much, that's what the work's worth. I won't have you thinking you owe me something beyond honest labor." $2 a week. Marina's mind reeled. That was generous. More than generous. Most housekeepers made half that, if they were lucky. Over 7 years, even saving just half of it, she could... "Why are you being so kind to us?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. People aren't kind without wanting something in return. Calder was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "My mother was sold on a block like this when I was about your boy's age," he said. Rich man bought her contract, took her to his plantation in Missouri. I never saw her again. Spent most of my childhood wondering where she ended up, if she was all right, if she even remembered me. He cleared his throat, his eyes distant. So when I saw you up here with those babies clinging to you, and I heard them talking about splitting you all up, well, I got enough money to make sure that doesn't happen. Seemed like the right thing to do. Marina felt something crack open in her chest. Some frozen, terrified part of her that had been locked tight since James died and the creditors came calling. She looked at this stranger, this rough-edged cowboy who'd just paid $500 to save a family he didn't know, and she saw something genuine in his face. Something good. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to... I can never repay..." "Don't want repayment," Calder said firmly. "I want you to work hard, raise your children right, and build a life for yourself. That's payment enough. Now," he gestured toward the waiting wagon. "My rig's over there. We should probably get moving before anyone changes their mind about this arrangement." The sheriff and Simmons were completing the paperwork, transferring the official documents of Marina's indenture contract to Calder's name. Marina watched in a daze as money changed hands, as signatures were applied to official-looking papers, as her life and the lives of her children were legally transferred from one man to another. But this felt different. This felt like salvation instead of damnation. Calder helped them down from the platform, his hand steady under Marina's elbow as her shaking legs nearly gave out. The crowd was dispersing now, the show over, though people still stared as the strange cowboy loaded a widow and 3 children into his wagon. The wagon itself was well maintained, the wood weathered but sound, the horses, a matched pair of chestnuts, looking healthy and strong. There was a canvas cover stretched over a framework of bent wood, providing shade, and Calder had already laid out blankets in the back. "There's water in that canteen," he said, pointing to a leather-covered bottle hanging from a nail. "And I packed some food for the journey. It's about 3 hours to the ranch, maybe a bit more with the little ones. Make yourselves as comfortable as you can." Marina lifted Jonah into the wagon, then Clara. Elias climbed up on his own, still watching Calder with wary eyes. Marina was about to pull herself up when Calder appeared at her side. "Let me help you, ma'am." His hand was warm and solid as he steadied her, and Marina found herself looking directly into his face for the first time. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 30, 32 at most. His face was all strong lines and weathered skin, with crow's feet at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun. There was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and another along his jaw. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, were kind. "Thank you," Marina said again, because she didn't know what else to say. Calder just nodded and moved to the front of the wagon, climbing up onto the driver's seat with easy grace. He took up the reins, clicked his tongue to the horses, and just like that, they were moving. Marina settled back against the blankets, pulling all 3 children close to her. Jonah immediately curled into her lap, exhausted from all the crying. Clara pressed against her side, her small hand clutched tight in Marina's skirt. Elias sat on her other side, still tense, still watching everything with those 2 old eyes. As the wagon rolled out of Lawrence, leaving behind the auction block and the crowd and the life Marina had known, she watched the town disappear behind them. Part of her couldn't believe this was real. Part of her kept waiting to wake up, to find herself still standing on that platform with strange men bidding on her children. But the wagon was solid beneath her. The children were warm in her arms. And Calder Rhodes, the stranger who'd become their unexpected savior, drove them steadily northward, toward a ranch she'd never seen, toward a future she couldn't imagine. "Mama." Elias's voice was small. "Are we really going to be okay?" Marina looked down at her eldest son, at the fear and hope warring in his young face, and she made a decision. She would choose to believe, she would choose to trust, because what other choice did she have? "Yes, baby," she said softly, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Yes, I think we are." The prairie stretched out before them, endless and golden in the late afternoon sun, and for the first time in months, Marina Doyle allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found someone who would keep them safe. The wagon rolled on, carrying them toward whatever came next. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the Kansas prairie in shades of amber and gold. When Calder finally turned the wagon off the main trail onto a narrow dirt road, Marina had been watching the landscape change for the past hour, the flat grasslands gradually giving way to gentle rolling hills, clusters of cottonwood trees marking the presence of water, and in the distance, the dark line of what might be a river or creek. Jonah had fallen asleep in her lap, his thumb stuck firmly in his mouth despite her attempts over the years to break him of the habit. Clara dozed fitfully against her side, occasionally jerking awake with a small cry before Marina could soothe her back to sleep. Only Elias remained vigilant, sitting upright and watching everything with those sharp green eyes that missed nothing. "Is that it?" Elias asked suddenly, pointing ahead. Marina followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. Nestled in a shallow valley between two hills surrounded by a split-rail fence that seemed to go on forever, was a sprawling ranch. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure built from weathered timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and side. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Behind the house, she could see a large barn, several outbuildings, and what looked like a series of corrals where horses moved like dark shadows in the fading light. "That's home," Calder called back over his shoulder. "Rhodes Ranch. Been in my family for about 15 years now. My father homesteaded it, and when he passed, it came to me." The wagon rattled down the road, and as they drew closer, Marina could see more details. The house needed paint, she noticed, and several of the porch boards looked like they might be loose. The garden that stretched along the south side of the house was overgrown, more weeds than vegetables, though she could see the remnants of what had once been carefully tended rows, laundry hung on a line, and Marina's practiced eye noted that the shirts and pants had been hung haphazardly, without attention to proper spacing or arrangement. A place that needed a woman's touch, she thought. A place that had been missing one. As they pulled into the yard, a man emerged from the barn, older than Calder, maybe 50, with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors. He raised a hand in greeting and walked over to meet the wagon. "Calder," the man said, his eyes moving from the driver to the wagon's cargo with undisguised curiosity. "Wasn't expecting you back until tomorrow." "Plans changed, Dutch." Calder set the brake and climbed down, stretching his back with an audible crack. "Found what I needed in Lawrence sooner than expected." Dutch's eyes settled on Marina and the children, and his expression shifted from curiosity to understanding. "I see. Well then," he stepped forward, offering Marina a calloused hand. "Name's Dutch Keller. I'm the ranch foreman here. Been working with Calder since his father's time." Marina carefully shifted Jonah's sleeping weight and took the offered hand. "Marina Doyle, and these are my children, Elias, Clara, and Jonah." "Ma'am." Dutch nodded respectfully. "Kids, welcome to Rhodes Ranch." Calder was already moving around to the back of the wagon, reaching up to help Marina down. His hands were strong and sure as they circled her waist, lifting her and Jonah down as if they weighed nothing at all. Marina felt her face flush at the contact, suddenly very aware that she hadn't been touched by a man, even in such an innocent way, since James died. "Clara, honey, wake up," Marina said softly, gently shaking her daughter's shoulder. "We're here." Clara stirred, her eyes opening slowly, confusion written across her small face. "Mama? Where?" Then memory returned and her expression crumpled. "I thought it was a dream. I thought we were still home and Papa was—" "Shh, sweet girl, I know." Marina gathered her close, meeting Calder's eyes over her daughter's head. He looked away quickly, busying himself with helping Elias down from the wagon. "The cabin's all ready," Dutch said to Calder, keeping his voice low but not low enough that Marina couldn't hear. "Fixed the window like you asked, and I had one of the boys bring over a bed frame from the bunkhouse. Ain't fancy, but it's sound." "That'll do fine." Calder turned to Marina. "Mrs. Doyle, I know you're all tired from the journey, but let me show you where you'll be staying. It's just over here." He led them across the yard toward a small structure that sat about 50 yards from the main house. It was a simple one-room cabin built from the same weathered timber as the main house, with a single window and a narrow porch. Someone, Dutch, Marina assumed, had swept the porch clean, and there was a rocking chair positioned beside the door. Calder pushed the door open and stepped aside to let Marina enter first. She walked in, still carrying Jonah, with Clara and Elias pressed close behind her. The cabin was small but clean. A cast-iron stove sat in one corner, its chimney pipe extending up through the roof. Against the far wall was a large bed frame with a straw tick mattress that looked new, or at least freshly stuffed. There was a table with 4 mismatched chairs, a trunk at the foot of the bed, and several hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. A lantern hung from a beam, and someone had left a stack of firewood beside the stove. It was simple, basic. And to Marina, who had spent the last 2 months sleeping in a single room at the boarding house, sharing a bed with all 3 children and living out of a single carpet bag, it looked like a palace. "I know it's not much," Calder said from the doorway. He sounded almost apologetic. "But it's weather-tight and warm. There's more blankets in the trunk, and Dutch stocked the shelves with basic supplies. Coffee, flour, beans, some salt pork. Enough to get you through the next few days until you get settled." Marina set Jonah down on the bed, where he immediately curled into a ball without fully waking. She turned to face Calder, and for a moment she couldn't find words. This stranger had given them more than shelter. He'd given them dignity. "It's perfect," she finally managed. "Mr. Rhodes, I don't know how to thank you. Already told you, don't need thanks." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just need you to be comfortable and ready to work come morning. The main house is in rough shape. Been trying to manage it myself since Mrs. Henderson passed, but I'm not much good at domestic matters. I can birth a colt and break a stallion, but I can't seem to keep a house from falling into chaos." Despite everything, Marina felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I think I can help with that." "Good." Calder moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. I need you to understand something, Mrs. Doyle. You're here as an employee, not as property. You've got your own space, your own door with a lock on it. You and the children are free to move about the ranch as you please. I'll expect a full day's work. And in return, you'll get fair wages, room and board, and respect. Anyone on this ranch treats you with anything less than respect. You come tell me directly. Understood?" Marina nodded, her throat tight with emotions she didn't quite know how to name. "Breakfast is at dawn," Calder continued. "Dutch and the ranch hands eat in the bunkhouse, but I take my meals in the main house. I'll expect you to cook for me and manage the household. Cleaning, laundry, mending, that sort of thing. The children can help as they're able, but I won't have them work like field hands. They're children, and they should have time to be children. Clear?" "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir," Calder said, a note of discomfort in his voice. "Makes me feel like my father. Just Calder is fine. Or Mr. Rhodes, if you're more comfortable with that." "Mr. Rhodes," Marina said softly. He nodded once and stepped out onto the porch. "There's a pump just behind the cabin for water, and the privy is about 20 yards that way." He pointed into the gathering darkness. "I'll let you get settled. If you need anything before morning, the main house is right there. Don't hesitate." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading as he crossed the yard back toward the main house. Marina stood in the doorway watching him go, trying to make sense of the strange turn her life had taken. "Mama?" Elias's voice was small. "Is this really where we're going to live?" Marina looked down at her son, saw the exhaustion and uncertainty in his young face, and made a decision. She would not burden these children with her own fears and doubts. They'd been through enough. "Yes, baby, this is home now." She ran her hand through his hair, smoothing down the cowlick that never would stay flat. "What do you think?" Elias walked slowly around the cabin, examining everything with careful attention. He tested the sturdiness of the table, checked the latch on the door, and peered into the trunk at the foot of the bed. Finally, he turned back to his mother. "It's bigger than where we were staying in town," he said carefully. "And it smells better. Less like other people's cooking and more like wood and grass." "That's the prairie you're smelling," Marina said. "Clean air and open space." Clara had been exploring too, though her investigation was less practical than her brother's. She'd discovered a small shelf beside the stove where someone had left a few basic dishes and cups. Now she stood on tiptoe, running her fingers along the edge of a blue-rimmed plate. "Mama, can this be my special plate?" she asked. "It has flowers painted on it, see?" Marina came over to look. The plate was simple earthenware with a crude but cheerful pattern of daisies around the rim. "I think that would be lovely, sweet girl. We'll use it for your breakfast tomorrow." "Really?" Clara's face lit up with the first genuine smile Marina had seen from her in months. "My very own plate. Your very own plate." It was such a small thing, Marina thought. A chipped plate with fading flowers. But to Clara, who had owned nothing but the dress on her back and a single rag doll for the past 2 months, it was treasure. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Marina got a fire going in the stove and heated water for washing. She found soap and clean rags in the trunk and gave each of the children a thorough scrubbing, washing away the dust of the journey and the terror of the day. She braided Clara's hair and checked Elias for ticks. She changed Jonah into the one clean nightshirt he owned and settled him properly in the bed. By the time full darkness had fallen, all 3 children were tucked into the bed together, clean and fed on the salt pork and beans Marina had prepared. They looked so small in that big bed, huddled together the way they'd learned to do in the cramped quarters of the boarding house. Marina stood by the stove, watching them sleep, and allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. Her hands were shaking, she realized. They'd been shaking since she climbed down from that auction block, but she'd been too focused on the children to notice. Now, in the quiet darkness of the cabin, the trembling spread through her whole body. She could have lost them. Dear God, she'd been minutes, seconds, away from watching Elias dragged away to that man's farm, from seeing Clara and Jonah sold to strangers, from being separated from her babies forever. The thought made her knees weak, and she had to grip the edge of the table to keep from sinking to the floor. A knock at the door made her jump. She pressed a hand to her racing heart and moved to answer it, expecting to see Calder. Instead, a young man stood on the porch, maybe 18 or 19, with a shock of red hair and a friendly, freckled face. "Evening, ma'am," he said, pulling off his hat respectfully. "Name's Tommy. I'm one of the ranch hands. Mr. Rhodes sent me over with these." He held out a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Marina took the basket and peeked under the cloth. Inside were fresh eggs, a loaf of bread that was still warm, a crock of butter, and a small jar of preserves. "Mr. Rhodes said to tell you this is for your breakfast," Tommy continued, "and that if you need anything at all, any of us boys would be happy to help. We're in the bunkhouse, that long building just past the barn." "Thank you," Marina said, her voice unsteady. "That's very kind." Tommy shuffled his feet, looking uncomfortable. We're glad you're here, ma'am. Place has been falling apart without someone to manage the house. And those are cute kids you got. Saw the little one earlier, fast asleep in the wagon. Reminded me of my little brother back home." He clapped his hat back on his head and disappeared into the darkness before Marina could respond. She closed the door and leaned against it, staring at the basket in her hands. Everywhere she turned, she found kindness. It was disorienting after months of suspicion and judgment, of townspeople who'd looked at her with pity at best and contempt at worst. Marina set the basket on the table and allowed herself, finally, to cry. She pressed her hands over her mouth to muffle the sound, not wanting to wake the children, and let the tears come. Fear and relief and exhaustion and desperate, fragile hope all poured out of her in silent, shaking sobs. When she finally had no tears left, she washed her face with the cold water from the basin and looked around the cabin again. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, work. Hard work, from the sound of it. But for tonight, they were safe. They were together. And that was enough. Marina changed into her nightdress, checked on the children one more time, and climbed into the bed beside them. The straw-tick mattress rustled beneath her weight, and Jonah immediately rolled over to press against her side, seeking warmth even in sleep. She gathered him close, feeling Clara's small hand find hers in the darkness, and closed her eyes. She didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, pulling her down into deep, dreamless darkness. Dawn came too early, announced by a rooster somewhere in the yard, and the sound of men's voices as the ranch hands made their way to the bunkhouse for breakfast. Marina woke with a start, momentarily disoriented before memory returned. The cabin. The ranch. Calder Rhodes and his impossible kindness. She slipped carefully out of bed, not wanting to wake the children yet, and dressed quickly in her work dress. A plain gray cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean and mended. She pinned up her hair, splashed cold water on her face, and started a fire in the stove. By the time the children began stirring, she had coffee brewing and eggs cooking. The bread from last night made perfect toast when held over the open flame of the stove, and with butter and preserves, it was better than anything they'd eaten in months. "Morning, Mama," Elias said sleepily, climbing out of bed and padding over to the table in his bare feet. "Smells good." "Morning, baby. Wash your face and hands, then come eat." They ate quickly, the children wolfing down their food with the appetite of youth. Marina barely tasted her own breakfast, too nervous about the day ahead. What if she couldn't meet Calder's expectations? What if the work was too much? What if he realized he'd made a mistake and... She forced herself to stop that line of thinking. One day at a time, one task at a time. That was how she'd survived the past few months, and that was how she'd survived this too. A knock at the door came just as they were finishing. Marina opened it to find Dutch standing on the porch, his hat in his hands. "Morning, Mrs. Doyle. Calder wanted me to show you around the main house this morning, explain where things are and what needs doing. The children are welcome to come along or stay here, whatever you think best." "They'll come with me," Marina said immediately. She wasn't ready to let them out of her sight, not yet. Maybe not ever again. Dutch led them across the yard to the main house. Up close, Marina could see just how much work the place needed. The porch boards creaked alarmingly under their feet, and the door stuck in its frame when Dutch pushed it open. Inside was chaos. The front room, which seemed to serve as both parlor and dining area, was cluttered with papers, tools, pieces of tack, and various items that clearly had no business being in a living space. Dust covered every surface. The windows were so dirty that the morning light came through in murky streams. "Like I said," Dutch's voice was apologetic, "we've let things go. Mrs. Henderson kept this place spotless, but after she passed, well, none of us know much about housekeeping. We tried, but I can see that," Marina said, surveying the disaster. Then she rolled up her sleeves. "All right, first things first. Clara, honey, can you take Jonah outside to play? Stay where I can see you from the window. Elias, you're with me. We're going to need every hand for this." Over the next several hours, Marina threw herself into the work with a determination that bordered on ferocity. She needed this, needed the physical labor, the tangible results, the sense of purpose. Elias helped her carry load after load of items that didn't belong in the house out to the porch, where Dutch sorted them and carried them to their proper places. Clara swept while Jonah played with his wooden horse in a patch of sunlight on the porch. Marina scrubbed floors, washed windows, beat rugs, and organized shelves. The kitchen was the worst. Layers of grease coated the stove, and the pantry was a disorganized mess of supplies that had been shoved onto shelves with no thought to order or efficiency. But Marina had grown up helping her mother run a household, and she knew how to bring order from chaos. She was on her hands and knees scrubbing the kitchen floor when she heard boots on the porch. She looked up to find Calder standing in the doorway, staring at the transformation with an expression of stunned disbelief. "Mrs. Doyle," he said slowly, "have you been working since dawn?" Marina sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "Yes, sir, Mr. Rhodes. I wanted to make a start on things." "A start?" Calder walked through the front room, his eyes taking in the clean windows, the dust-free surfaces, the organized space. "This is more than a start. This is a miracle." "It's just cleaning, Mr. Rhodes. Nothing miraculous about soap and water and elbow grease." But Calder was shaking his head. "You don't understand. This place, it's been 6 months since Mrs. Henderson died. 6 months of me and Dutch trying and failing to keep it livable. And in one morning, you've..." He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "I knew I needed help, but I didn't realize how much until just now." Marina felt her face flush with pleasure at the praise. "There's still much to do. The pantry needs a complete overhaul, and I noticed the garden is in terrible shape, but it's a start." "It's more than that." Calder looked at her, really looked at her, and Marina saw something in his expression that she couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe, or appreciation. "Thank you." "You're paying me to do this," Marina pointed out. "No thanks necessary." "Maybe so, but I'm thanking you anyway." He glanced toward the window where Clara and Jonah were playing in the yard. "Your children, they doing all right?" "As well as can be expected, I think. They're resilient. That boy of yours, Elias, he's got a good head on his shoulders. Found him earlier helping Dutch fix a fence post. Didn't have to be asked, just saw what needed doing and did it. Pride swelled in Marina's chest. He's always been that way, tries to help carry the weight, even when he's too young to understand what that weight is. Well, he's welcome to help around the ranch if he wants. We've got plenty of light work that would suit a boy his age. Might be good for him. Give him something to focus on besides. Calder gestured vaguely, clearly not wanting to say, besides watching his mother almost lose everything on an auction block. I think he'd like that, Marina said softly. He's been cooped up for too long. He needs space to run and work to do. They stood there for a moment, an oddly comfortable silence stretching between them. Then Calder cleared his throat and stepped back. Right. Well, I'll let you get back to it. I need to check on the horses in the south pasture, but I'll be back for dinner around noon. Nothing fancy, just whatever you can put together. I'll manage, Marina assured him. After he left, she returned to her work, but her mind kept drifting back to the conversation. There was something about Calder Rhodes that she couldn't quite figure out. He was gruff and plain-spoken, uncomfortable with emotion or gratitude. But beneath that rough exterior was a deep well of kindness. The way he looked at her children, not as burdens or obligations, but as human beings worthy of care and consideration, that meant more to Marina than any amount of money could. By noon, she had dinner ready, a simple meal of fried salt pork, beans, and cornbread made from the supplies in the pantry. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling, and when Calder came in from the pasture and sat down at the now clean table, he ate with the enthusiasm of a man who'd been living on his own poorly cooked meals for too long. Best meal I've had in months, he said, reaching for a second piece of cornbread. Maybe years. Marina, eating her own dinner while standing near the stove and keeping an eye on the children at the smaller table she'd set up for them, felt warmth spread through her chest. It's just simple food, Mr. Rhodes. Sometimes simple is exactly what's needed. He glanced at the children. They eating enough? Marina looked over at Elias, Clara, and Jonah, all three of them focused intently on their plates. More than enough? This is more food than they've seen in a while. Calder's jaw tightened. Well, there's plenty more where that came from. This ranch runs lean sometimes, but we never go hungry. Make sure they know that. They can eat their fill at every meal. Over the next few days, a routine began to establish itself. Marina would wake before dawn, get the children dressed and fed, then head to the main house to prepare Calder's breakfast. After he headed out to work the ranch, she'd spend the morning cleaning, organizing, and slowly bringing order to the chaos. The children would play nearby, or Elias would disappear with Dutch to help with light chores around the property. Clara discovered the abandoned garden and declared it her special project. With Marina's permission and some basic instruction, she began the work of clearing out the weeds and identifying which plants could be saved. Jonah followed her around like a small shadow, alternately helping and hindering her efforts. Marina found herself falling into the rhythm of ranch life more easily than she'd expected. There was something deeply satisfying about the work. The way a dirty floor became clean under her hands, the way an organized pantry made cooking easier, the way fresh bread filled the house with warmth and comfort. It was honest work, and she was good at it. Calder, for his part, was a considerate employer. He never demanded more than was reasonable, always thanked her for the meals she prepared, and made a point of asking after the children every evening. He was a man of few words, but the words he did speak were genuine. It was on the fourth day that something shifted. Marina was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard a commotion from outside, raised voices and what sounded like Elias shouting. She dropped the spoon she'd been holding and ran for the door, her heart in her throat. In the yard, she found Elias backed up against the barn wall, his face streaked with tears of fury, while one of the ranch hands, a man she'd seen around but hadn't been introduced to, loomed over him. The man was big, well over 6 feet and heavy with muscle, and he looked angry. "What's going on here?" Marina demanded, moving toward her son. "Your boy," the ranch hand said, his voice rough with irritation. "Just cost me a week's wages." "I didn't mean to," Elias's voice cracked. "I was just trying to help." "Elias, what happened?" Marina reached her son and put herself between him and the angry man. I was helping with the horses," Elias stammered, "and Mr. Pike asked me to hold the gate while he moved the stallion to the other corral. But the horse got spooked, and he ran past me, and now he's loose, and that stallion's worth more than you'll make in 5 years, boy, Pike snarled. If he gets hurt or runs off the property, it comes out of my pay. Do you understand that? Back off. The command came from behind them, and Marina turned to see Calder striding across the yard, his expression thunderous. Pike, step away from the boy. Now. Pike hesitated, then moved back, but his face was still twisted with anger. Calder, that boy of hers let Red Devil loose. If we lose that horse, we're not going to lose the horse, Calder said calmly. Tommy and Dutch are already tracking him. He won't have gone far, probably just down to the creek. And even if we do lose him, that's not the boy's fault. You shouldn't have put a 7-year-old in charge of holding a gate for an unbroken stallion in the first place. What were you thinking? I was thinking I needed an extra hand, and he was offering. He's a child, Pike, a child trying to be helpful. If that horse gets loose, that's on you for poor judgment, not on him. Calder's voice had gone cold. Now get out to the south pasture and help find Red Devil. And Pike, if I ever see you looming over one of these children again, you'll be looking for work elsewhere. Are we clear? Pike glared but nodded once before stalking off toward the pasture. Marina felt Elias trembling against her side and pulled him close. I'm sorry, Elias whispered. I'm so sorry, Mama. I was just trying to help. I thought, shh, baby, it's all right. She looked up at Calder. Mr. Rhodes, I apologize. I should have. You have nothing to apologize for, Calder said firmly. He crouched down to Elias's level. Son, you listening to me? Elias nodded miserably. You made a mistake, that's all. Everyone makes mistakes, especially when they're learning. The important thing is that you were trying to help, and that tells me you've got character. But from now on, before you take on any task with the animals, you check with me or Dutch first. Some of these horses are dangerous, even for experienced hands. Understood? Yes, sir, Elias said quietly. Good. Calder stood back up, and Marina saw something in his face soften as he looked at her son. Why don't you come with me? We'll go check on the chickens. That's a job that's hard to mess up, and we need someone to collect the eggs anyway. Your mama could probably use them for baking. Elias looked up at Marina, asking silent permission. She nodded, and the boy moved cautiously to Calder's side. Together, they walked toward the chicken coop, Calder's hand resting briefly on Elias's shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. Marina stood in the yard, watching them go, and felt something shift in her chest. This man, this rough, plain-spoken cowboy who'd bought them off an auction block, was treating her son with more kindness and patience than his own father had sometimes managed. James had loved his children, but he'd been stern, quick to judge, and slow to forgive mistakes. Calder was different. Harder on the outside, perhaps, but with a gentleness at his core that he tried to hide. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Marina sat in the rocking chair on the porch and let herself think about the future for the first time in months. 7 years of her contract stretched ahead. 7 years of working on this ranch, raising her children in this small cabin, seeing Calder Rhodes every day. It should have felt like a prison sentence. Instead, sitting there in the warm darkness with the sound of crickets singing in the grass and the stars bright overhead, it felt like the first real home she'd had since James died. And that realization, more than anything else that had happened in the past few days, terrified her. Because Marina Doyle had learned the hard way that good things didn't last, that safety was an illusion, that trusting someone, anyone, was a luxury she couldn't afford. But as she sat there in the darkness, listening to the peaceful sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, she found herself wanting to believe, wanting to trust, wanting to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally found a place where they could heal. Inside the cabin, Jonah cried out in his sleep, and Marina went to him, soothing him back to dreams. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to prove herself. But for tonight, they were safe. And for now, that was enough. The weeks passed with the swiftness that surprised Marina. June melted into July, and the Kansas summer settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket, bringing with it long days of work and longer evenings filled with the sound of cicadas and the children's laughter. The cabin that had seemed so strange on that first night now felt familiar, lived in, and the rhythms of ranch life had become as natural as breathing. Clara's garden was flourishing under her devoted attention. The little girl would spend hours crouched among the rows, her dress stained with dirt, carefully tending to the tomato plants and beans and squash that were finally beginning to produce. She'd created a small scarecrow from straw and old clothes that Calder had given her, and she'd named it Mr. Friendly, because, as she explained seriously to her mother, he needs to be nice to the birds even while he's scaring them away, Mama. Otherwise it's just mean. Elias had become Dutch's shadow, following the older man around the ranch and soaking up everything he could learn about horses and cattle and the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. The incident with Red Devil, who had been found peacefully drinking from the creek and returned to his corral without incident, had made Elias more cautious, but it hadn't dampened his eagerness to help. If anything, he seemed determined to prove himself, to show that he could be trusted with responsibility. Even Jonah was thriving. The little boy who had spent months cooped up in a single room at the boarding house now ran wild through the ranch yard, his face tanned and his legs growing strong from constant motion. He followed Clara around the garden, helped his mother gather eggs from the chicken coop, and had developed an absolute fascination with the horses that sometimes worried Marina. More than once, she'd found him standing at the corral fence, his small hand stretched through the rails, trying to touch the massive animals on the other side. Marina herself had transformed the main house. What had been chaos was now order, every room scrubbed clean, every surface organized, every window sparkling in the sunlight. She'd mended the curtains, beaten the rugs until they were nearly their original colors, and polished the furniture until it gleamed. The pantry was a marvel of efficiency, every ingredient labeled and stored properly, and her bread, which she baked fresh every other day, had become something of a legend among the ranch hands. Calder never said much about the changes, but Marina had learned to read the small signs of his approval, the way he paused in the doorway of the front room, his eyes taking in the transformation, the satisfied sound he made when he bit into a piece of her fried chicken, the fact that he'd started taking his evening coffee on the porch instead of retreating immediately to his room, as if he finally found the house comfortable enough to linger in. They'd fallen into an easy routine, the two of them. Marina would have his breakfast ready at dawn, they'd exchange a few words about the day's plans, and then he'd disappear into the work of running the ranch. She'd spend the day managing the household, preparing meals, and keeping an eye on the children. In the evening, they'd share dinner, Calder at the main table, Marina and the children at the smaller one she'd set up near the kitchen, and then he'd head out to check on the animals one more time while she cleaned up and got the children ready for bed. It was a professional relationship, proper and distant, and Marina told herself that was exactly how it should be. She was his employee. He was her employer. The fact that she'd started noticing things about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, rare as that was, or the gentle patience he showed with her children, or the sound of his voice in the evening when he'd stop by the garden to compliment Clara on her work, none of that mattered. None of that could matter. But then came the storm. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in late July, when the air turned thick and strange, pressing down on the ranch like a physical weight. Marina had been hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she noticed the sky to the west turning an odd greenish-gray color. The wind, which had been blowing steadily all morning, suddenly died to nothing, leaving an eerie stillness that made her skin prickle with instinctive alarm. "Elias," she called, scanning the yard. "Clara! Jonah! Come here right now!" The children appeared from various corners of the ranch, responding to the urgency in her voice. Elias came running from the barn. Clara emerged from her garden with dirt on her hands, and Jonah toddled over from where he'd been playing with his wooden horse near the porch. "What's wrong, Mama?" Clara asked, looking up at the strange sky with wide eyes. "I'm not sure, sweet girl, but I think—" "Storm coming!" Dutch's voice rang out across the yard. Marina turned to see him hurrying toward them, his face tight with concern. "Big one, by the look of it. Mrs. Doyle, you need to get those children inside, now." "What about—" Marina started to ask about Calder, but Dutch was already shaking his head. "He's out checking the south fence line. Tommy's gone to fetch him, but it might take a while. You just worry about yourself and those kids. Get in the house, the main house, not your cabin. It's sturdier, and if this is what I think it is, you'll want solid walls around you." Marina didn't argue. She scooped Jonah into her arms and herded Elias and Clara toward the main house, glancing over her shoulder at the approaching storm. The greenish clouds were roiling now, moving toward them with frightening speed, and she could see lightning flickering in their depths like the tongues of some massive serpent. They'd barely made it through the door when the wind hit. It came all at once, a roaring blast that rattled the windows and made the entire house groan. Rain followed seconds later, not falling so much as being hurled sideways by the wind, beating against the walls like fists demanding entry. "Mama, I'm scared," Clara whimpered, pressing against Marina's side. "I know, baby, but we're safe in here. This house is strong." Marina tried to keep her voice steady, but her own heart was racing. She'd lived through prairie storms before, but this one felt different, more violent, more angry. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud that Jonah screamed and buried his face in Marina's shoulder. Elias moved to the window, trying to see out through the sheets of rain. "Don't stand by the window," Marina said sharply. "Come away from there, Elias." "But Mama, I can't see Mr. Rhodes. What if he's still out there? What if..." Another blast of wind hit the house, and this time Marina heard something crack. She looked up in time to see one of the upstairs shutters tear loose and go flying past the window, disappearing into the gray chaos of the storm. "Everyone into the kitchen," she ordered. "Away from the windows, now." They huddled together in the kitchen, which sat at the center of the house with only one small window. Marina pulled the children close, wrapping her arms around all three of them while the storm raged outside. The wind howled like a living thing, and the rain hammered at the walls with such force that she could feel the vibrations through the floor. Minutes passed like hours. Clara was crying silently, her face pressed into Marina's dress. Jonah had gone very still and quiet, which worried her more than tears would have. Even Elias, trying so hard to be brave, was trembling. Then, through the roar of the storm, Marina heard a new sound, the crack of splitting wood, followed by a tremendous crash that shook the entire house. Something had given way, though she couldn't tell what. "Mama!" Elias's voice was high with fear. "What was that?" "I don't know, baby. Just hold on. Just hold on to me." The kitchen door burst open, and Marina's scream caught in her throat as a figure stumbled through, soaking wet, streaming water, but blessedly, wonderfully familiar. Calder. He slammed the door shut behind him, bracing his weight against it as the wind tried to tear it open again. His hair was plastered to his head, his clothes were drenched, and there was a cut on his forehead that was bleeding steadily, mixing with the rain on his face. "Mr. Rhodes!" Marina started to rise, but he held up a hand. "Stay where you are. Keep the children down." His voice was steady despite the blood and the chaos. "The barn roof just partially collapsed. Nobody was hurt, thank God, but we've got horses loose in this mess, and..." He broke off as another tremendous gust of wind hit the house. This time, Marina heard glass shatter somewhere upstairs. "Is it a tornado?" Elias asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Don't know for sure," Calder said, moving away from the door now that it seemed secure. "But it's bad enough that we're staying put until it passes. Dutch and the boys are securing what they can, but mostly we're just riding it out at this point." He crossed to where Marina sat with the children and crouched down, bringing himself to their eye level. His storm-gray eyes were calm despite everything, and Marina felt some of her own panic ease just from his presence. "You kids doing all right?" he asked gently. "I'm scared," Clara whispered. "That's smart," Calder said. "Fear's just your body's way of telling you to pay attention. Nothing wrong with being scared as long as you don't let it make you stupid. And you're all being very brave, staying calm, and listening to your mama. That's good." "You're bleeding," Elias pointed out, staring at the cut on Calder's forehead. "Am I?" Calder touched his head and looked surprised at the blood on his fingers. "Must have caught a branch on the way back. Mrs. Doyle, you got anything I could..." But Marina was already moving. She settled Jonah into Elias's arms and crossed to the kitchen basin, grabbing a clean cloth and wetting it. When she returned to Calder, she hesitated for just a moment before reaching up to dab at the cut. "Hold still," she murmured, focusing on the wound to avoid meeting his eyes. She was acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers, of the way he'd gone very still at her touch. The cut wasn't deep, thankfully, though it was bleeding freely the way head wounds did. Marina cleaned it carefully, her movements gentle but efficient, and tried to ignore the way her heart was beating too fast. "Thank you," Calder said quietly, his voice pitched just for her. For taking care of the house. For keeping the children calm. You're good at this. At managing a crisis. Had plenty of practice, Marina said, a trace of bitterness creeping into her voice before she could stop it. She pressed the cloth against the cut, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. When your husband dies and leaves you with 3 children and a mountain of debt, you learn to manage crises. I'm sorry, Calder said, about your husband, about what you went through. Marina met his eyes then, and something in his expression made her throat tighten. Sympathy, yes, but also understanding. This man knew what loss looked like. He'd lived through his own. It's past, she said softly. We survived. That's what matters. Surviving isn't the same as living. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Marina wasn't quite ready to examine. She pulled the cloth away from his forehead and inspected the cut. The bleeding had slowed. You'll live, she said, trying to lighten the moment, though you're going to have a nasty bruise. Won't be my first. Calder's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Then his expression sobered as another gust of wind rattled the house. Storm's not letting up. We might be here a while. They were there for 3 hours. 3 hours of huddling in the kitchen while the storm tore across the prairie with savage fury. 3 hours of wind and rain and thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. 3 hours during which Marina learned things about Calder roads that she hadn't known before. He was good with the children, for one thing. When Jonah grew restless and frightened, Calder distracted him with a story about a legendary horse that could outrun the wind. When Clara started crying again, he pulled a slightly battered peppermint stick from his pocket. Where he'd gotten it, Marina had no idea, and gave it to her with such solemnity that she stopped mid-sob. When Elias peppered him with worried questions about the horses and the ranch, he answered each one honestly but reassuringly, treating the 7-year-old like his concerns were valid and important. And he was kind. Marina had known that already, of course. You didn't buy a widow and her 3 children off an auction block if you weren't fundamentally kind, but she saw it again in the small gestures. The way he positioned himself between the children and the windows, as if his body could shield them from harm. The way he kept his voice calm and steady, even when she could see the worry in his eyes. The way he met her gaze across the children's heads and gave her small nods of encouragement, as if to say, "You're doing fine. We're going to be all right." By the time the storm finally began to ease, moving off to the east with the last few rumbles of thunder, Marina felt wrung out and exhausted. But they were safe. They were all safe. "I need to go check on the damage," Calder said, rising stiffly from where he'd been sitting on the floor. "Make sure none of the animals are hurt. See what we lost. You and the children should stay here until I come back and tell you it's safe to go outside. There might be debris everywhere, and I don't want anyone stepping on a nail or cutting themselves on broken wood." "Be careful," Marina said, then felt foolish for saying it. Of course he'd be careful. But Calder just smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "Yes, ma'am." After he left, Marina got the children settled in the front room and went to assess the damage to the house itself. Several windows were broken, rain had gotten in and soaked the floors upstairs, and there would be a lot of cleanup to do. But the structure was sound. They'd weathered the storm. An hour later, Calder returned with Dutch and 2 of the ranch hands. His face was grim. "How bad?" Marina asked, meeting him at the door. "Could be worse. The barn roof needs repair, and we lost part of the fence around the north pasture. Found most of the horses. They'd taken shelter in the trees down by the creek, but..." He paused, his jaw tight. "Mrs. Henderson's old house. The one that's been empty since she passed. It's gone. Storm just tore it apart." "Oh no," Marina breathed. "Yeah." Calder ran a hand through his still damp hair. "We're going to be doing repairs for weeks. But nobody was hurt, and that's what matters. The rest is just work." Over the next few days, the ranch buzzed with activity as everyone pitched in to repair the storm damage. Marina found herself working alongside the men, hauling debris, holding boards steady while they hammered, and generally making herself useful wherever she could. The children helped too, Elias carrying tools, Clara bringing water to the workers, even Jonah collecting the bent nails that could be straightened and reused. Marina watched Calder through those days with growing respect. He worked harder than anyone, often laboring from dawn until long past dark, his hands becoming torn and blistered despite the calluses that already marked them. But he never complained, never snapped at anyone in frustration, and always made sure to thank each person for their help. He was a good leader, she realized. The kind of man others wanted to follow. It was on the third day after the storm, as Marina was sweeping broken glass from one of the upstairs bedrooms, that she heard shouting from outside. She rushed to the window, now repaired with new glass that Calder had brought from town, and saw a man riding into the yard on a lathered horse. Even from a distance, she could see that something was wrong. By the time she got downstairs, Calder and Dutch were talking to the rider in urgent, low voices. Marina caught only fragments, saw smoke about 10 miles east, and heading this direction. And how much time do we have? What's going on? She asked, approaching them. Calder turned to her, and the expression on his face sent a spike of fear through her chest. Prairie fire, he said. Started by lightning from the storm, most likely. It's burning this direction, and if the wind doesn't change, it could reach us by nightfall. Marina felt the blood drain from her face. She'd heard stories of prairie fires, of how they could sweep across miles of grassland faster than a horse could run, consuming everything in their path. What do? We fight, Calder said simply. We've got the creek to the south. If we can create a firebreak wide enough, we might be able to stop it there. But it's going to take everyone working together, and there's no guarantees. He looked at her steadily. Mrs. Doyle, I need you to get the children and anything you can't afford to lose into the wagon. If the fire gets too close, Dutch is going to drive you and the kids to town. No arguments. I'm not leaving, Marina said immediately. You'll need every hand to fight this fire. The children can go with Dutch, but I'm staying. Mrs. Doyle, Marina, she interrupted. If we're about to fight for our lives together, you might as well call me Marina, and I'm staying. I've got 2 hands and a working back, and you need both. The children will be safe with Dutch. For a moment she thought Calder would argue, but then he nodded slowly. All right. But you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. Fire doesn't give second chances. Understood. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Marina helped Dutch get the children settled in the wagon with supplies and instructions to head for town at the first sign that the fire was getting too close. Elias wanted to stay and help, argued and pleaded, but Marina was firm. You're the oldest, she told him, gripping his shoulders and looking into his eyes. I need you to take care of Clara and Jonah. Can you do that for me? Can you be the brave one and keep them safe? Elias's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. Yes, Mama. That's my boy. She hugged him tightly, then Clara, then Jonah, trying not to think about the fact that this might be the last time. I love you, all of you, more than anything in this world. Then she turned away before she could change her mind and joined the line of people working to create a firebreak. They used shovels and hoes and their bare hands to clear a strip of land along the south side of the creek, removing every scrap of grass and brush that could catch fire. It was brutal work. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Marina's hands were soon blistered and bleeding. But she didn't stop. None of them stopped. By late afternoon, they could see the smoke on the horizon, a dark, ominous wall that blotted out the sky. The air grew thick and acrid, making every breath burn. The wind had picked up, blowing toward them, and Marina could feel the heat of the distant flames on her face. It's moving fast, Dutch said, appearing beside Calder where he stood surveying their work. Faster than I thought. We might not have enough time to finish the break. Then we make time, Calder said grimly. We're not losing this ranch. Not to fire, not to anything. They worked as the fire drew closer, as the smoke grew thicker, as the world took on an orange, hellish glow. Marina's lungs burned with every breath, and her arms felt like they might fall off, but she kept digging, kept clearing, kept moving. And then, when the fire was close enough that she could hear it roaring like some monstrous beast, when sparks were beginning to fall around them like deadly snow, Calder grabbed her arm. That's it, he said. We've done all we can. Now we wet everything down and pray. They'd filled every barrel, bucket, and container they could find with water from the creek. Now they formed a line and passed the containers from hand to hand, soaking the firebreak, the buildings, even themselves. Marina's clothes were drenched, her hair dripping, and still the fire came on. It hit their fire break just as the sun was setting, and for one terrible moment Marina thought all their work had been for nothing. The flames leaped and danced, testing the barrier they'd created, searching for any scrap of fuel to feed on. The heat was incredible, like standing in front of an open furnace, and Marina had to shield her face with her arm. But the break held. The fire raged along the south side of the creek, burning itself out against the barrier of cleared land and water. It tried to jump across, sparks flying like angry fireflies, but each time the flames found only wet earth and stone. Slowly, agonizingly, the wall of fire began to move past them, sweeping to the east and leaving behind scorched, blackened earth. They'd done it. They'd saved the ranch. Marina sank to her knees, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and relief. Around her, the ranch hands were cheering, embracing each other, some of them actually crying. She felt tears on her own face, but couldn't tell if they were from the smoke or from emotion. Then Calder was there, kneeling beside her, his face black with soot and his eyes red from the smoke. "You all right?" he asked hoarsely. Marina nodded, not trusting her voice. "You fought like a demon," Calder said, and there was something in his expression, admiration maybe, or respect, or something deeper that she didn't dare name. "I've never seen anything like it. You and your children, you're fighters, all of you." "We survive," Marina managed. "That's what we do." "No," Calder said softly, reaching out to brush a streak of soot from her cheek. The gesture was gentle, intimate, and sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "You do more than survive, Marina. You live. You fight for what matters. That's different." Their eyes met and held, and Marina felt the world narrow down to just the two of them. The noise of the celebrating ranch hands faded. The acrid smell of smoke receded. There was only Calder's face, lined with exhaustion and marked with soot, and his eyes looking at her with something that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Calder, she started, but then Dutch was calling for him, something about checking the buildings one more time to make sure no sparks had caught, and the moment broke. Calder rose, offering Marina his hand to help her up. She took it, feeling the rough calluses of his palm against hers, and allowed him to pull her to her feet. "Come on," he said, his voice returning to its usual gruff practicality. "Let's make sure we really save this place. Then we can rest." But as Marina followed him across the scorched earth, past the exhausted but jubilant ranch hands, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her, couldn't stop replaying his words in her mind, couldn't stop feeling the ghost of his touch on her cheek. Something had shifted between them in the smoke and heat of that desperate battle, something fundamental, and Marina didn't know whether to be terrified or exhilarated by what that might mean. The children returned the next morning, brought back by a sheepish Dutch, who reported that they'd made it about 5 miles toward town before the wind had shifted and turned the fire away from the ranch entirely. By that time, it had been too dangerous to come back in the dark, so they'd camped for the night and returned at first light. Clara ran to Marina and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist, crying with relief. Elias tried to be brave but couldn't quite hide the way his hands shook as he hugged her. Even Jonah, who didn't fully understand what had happened, clung to her with unusual intensity. "I thought," Clara hiccuped, "I thought we might not see you again, Mama." "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Marina held all 3 of them close, breathing in the sweet, familiar smell of them, and silently thanked God and Calder Rhodes and anyone else who might have had a hand in keeping them all alive. Calder stood nearby, watching the reunion with an unreadable expression. When Marina's eyes met his over the children's heads, he gave her a small nod. Acknowledgement, understanding, something more, and then turned away to deal with the continuing cleanup. That evening, after the children were fed and settled in the cabin, after the worst of the mess had been cleared and the immediate danger had passed, Marina found herself drawn back to the main house. She told herself it was just to check on things, to make sure nothing had been overlooked, but she knew that was a lie. She found Calder on the front porch, sitting in one of the chairs they'd salvaged from the storm damage. He had a cup of coffee in his hands and was staring out at the darkened prairie, at the scorched earth that marked how close they'd come to losing everything. "Mind if I sit?" Marina asked softly. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "It's your porch, too." You don't have to ask. Marina settled into the chair beside his, and for a long moment they sat in comfortable silence. The night was clear, the smoke had finally dispersed, and the stars were brilliant overhead. "Thank you," Marina said finally, "for everything. For buying us off that auction block, for giving us a home, for fighting to save it yesterday, for—" her voice caught, "for caring about us like we matter." "You do matter," Calder said quietly. "You and those children, you matter more than you know." There was something in his voice that made Marina's breath catch. She turned to look at him and found him already watching her, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the starlight. "Marina," he said, and the sound of her name on his lips sent warmth spreading through her chest. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been trying not to think about because it's too soon and too complicated and probably too foolish. But after yesterday, after almost losing the ranch, after watching you fight beside me like you'd been born to this life, I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." Marina's heart was hammering now. "Feel what?" "That you're not just my housekeeper," Calder said. "That those children aren't just workers' kids living on my property. That this," he gestured between them, "isn't just an employer and employee arrangement anymore. At least not for me." The world seemed to tilt. Marina gripped the arms of her chair, trying to find her balance. "Calder, I'm not sure what you're saying." "I'm saying I care about you," he said simply. "I'm saying that somewhere between pulling you off that auction block and watching you scrub my kitchen floors and seeing you dig fire breaks with bleeding hands, I started to care about you in a way that's got nothing to do with contracts or employment. I'm saying that when I think about the future of this ranch, I can't picture it without you in it." Marina couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Calder said. "I know you're strong and brave and fiercer than anyone I've ever met when it comes to protecting your children. I know you work harder than you should and never complain. I know the sound of your laugh when Clara says something funny, and the way you hum when you're kneading bread, and how you check on each of the kids one more time before you go to sleep at night, even though you're exhausted." "You've been watching me," Marina whispered. "I can't seem to help it." Calder's voice was rough with honesty. "I'm not asking for anything, Marina. I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving your husband. I know you've got every reason in the world not to trust men or love or promises about the future. I needed you to know. I needed to be honest about what I'm feeling." Marina sat there, her mind whirling, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. Part of her wanted to retreat, to protect herself, to remind him that she was his employee, and this was inappropriate and dangerous. But another part, a part that had been waking up slowly over the past weeks, wanted to lean into this feeling, to admit that she'd been watching him too. That somewhere along the way he'd stopped being the stranger who saved her and become something more. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "You don't have to say anything," Calder said. "Not now. Not until you're ready. I just wanted you to know where I stand. The rest, that's up to you. Whatever you decide, nothing changes. You've still got a job here, still got a home here for as long as you want it. No pressure, no expectations, just honesty." He stood then, setting his coffee cup aside. "Good night, Marina. Sleep well." And then he was gone, disappearing into the house and leaving her alone on the porch with the stars and the crickets and the thundering of her own heart. Marina sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of everything, trying to understand how her life had turned upside down so completely in just a few short weeks, trying to figure out what she felt about Calder Rhodes, this gruff, kind, complicated man who'd looked at her like she was something precious. The truth was, she didn't know. She was attracted to him, yes. She'd have to be blind not to notice his strength, his integrity, the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence. And she was grateful to him, deeply and truly grateful for everything he'd done for her and her children. But was that enough? Was gratitude and attraction the same as the kind of feeling that could build a life on? And even if it was she ready? James had only been gone for 8 months. Was it wrong to be feeling this way so soon? Marina had no answers, but as she finally made her way back to the cabin, as she checked on her sleeping children and climbed into bed, she found herself thinking about Calder's words. "When I think about the future of this ranch, I can't picture it without you in it." And she realized, with a start that was equal parts terrifying and thrilling, that she couldn't picture it without him either. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no hint of the chaos of the past week. Marina woke early and went through her usual routine, dressing, checking the children, starting breakfast. But everything felt different now, charged with new meaning, as if the very air had changed its composition overnight. When she arrived at the main house to prepare Calder's breakfast, she found him already in the kitchen, making coffee with the clumsy competence of someone who'd been doing it for himself too long. "Morning," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Morning," she replied, and suddenly the kitchen felt too small, the air between them too thick. They moved around each other carefully, maintaining proper distance, speaking only when necessary. It was awkward in a way it had never been before, and Marina hated it. Whatever else Calder's confession had done, it had disrupted the easy companionship they'd built. It wasn't until she was setting his plate in front of him, eggs and bacon and the toast she knew he preferred slightly burnt, that he caught her hand. "Marina, wait." She froze, acutely aware of his fingers wrapped around her wrist, of the warmth of his touch. "I'm sorry," Calder said quietly, releasing her hand. "I didn't mean to make things strange between us. If I've made you uncomfortable—" "You haven't," Marina said quickly. Then, more carefully, "Or rather you have, but not in a bad way. Just in a different way. I need time to think, Calder, to figure out what I feel, what I want. Can you give me that?" "All the time you need," he promised. "Like I said, nothing has to change unless you want it to." But something already had changed, Marina thought as she returned to her work. The question was whether that change would break what they had or transform it into something even better. She didn't know the answer yet, but for the first time in a very long time, she found herself hoping for the future instead of just surviving the present. And that, perhaps, was the most important change of all. The days that followed Calder's confession fell into a strange new rhythm. On the surface, everything appeared the same. Marina still rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, still managed the household with quiet efficiency, still tended to her children with the fierce devotion that defined her. Calder still worked from sunrise to sunset, still took his meals at the main table while Marina and the children ate at the smaller one, still thanked her for every meal with that slight nod of his head. But beneath the surface, everything had shifted. Marina found herself hyper-aware of his presence in a way she hadn't been before. The sound of his boots on the porch would make her heart skip. The sight of him working in the corral, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, would make her forget what she'd been doing. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she'd catch him watching her with an expression that was equal parts longing and restraint. She was thinking about him far too much, and she knew it. But knowing it and stopping it were two entirely different things. It was Clara who first noticed the change, with the uncanny perception children sometimes have for unspoken truths. One evening, as Marina was braiding her daughter's hair before bed, Clara spoke up in that innocent, devastating way of hers. "Mama, do you like Mr. Rhodes?" Marina's hands stilled. "Of course I like him, sweet girl. He's been very kind to us." "No, I mean—" Clara twisted around to look at her mother with serious blue eyes. "Do you like him the way Papa said he liked you? The way that makes people want to hold hands and kiss?" Heat flooded Marina's face. "Clara, that's not— Where did you get such an idea?" "I see things," Clara said matter-of-factly. "I saw how Mr. Rhodes looked at you after the fire. And I see how you get all funny when he's around now, like you forget what you were saying in the middle of saying it. Elias says I'm imagining things, but I'm not. I'm very good at noticing." Marina took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation. "Mr. Rhodes is a good man, and yes, I care about him. But it's complicated, Clara. Your papa only passed away this year, and I'm not sure it's right to have feelings for someone else so soon." Clara was quiet for a moment, her small face thoughtful. Then she said, "Mama, do you think Papa would want you to be sad forever?" The question hit Marina like a physical blow. "What?" "Papa," Claire repeated patiently, "do you think he'd want you to be sad and lonely forever? Because I don't think he would. I think he'd want you to be happy. He used to tell me that all the time, that he wanted me to be happy. Why wouldn't he want the same thing for you?" Marina gathered her daughter into her arms, blinking back tears. "When did you get so wise, little one?" "I've always been wise," Clara said seriously. "You just don't always notice because I'm small." That night, lying in bed with her children sleeping peacefully beside her, Marina found herself thinking about James for the first time in weeks, without the usual crushing weight of grief. She thought about the good times, the way he'd laugh at his own terrible jokes, the pride in his eyes when Elias was born, the gentle way he'd dance with her in their tiny kitchen when the children were asleep. But she also let herself remember the hard times, his stubborn pride that wouldn't let him ask for help, the debts he'd hidden from her, the way he'd sometimes make her feel small with his dismissive comments about women's concerns. James had loved her. She didn't doubt that. But their marriage had been built on necessity as much as affection, two young people making the best of circumstances in a hard world. It had been good, mostly, but it hadn't been the fairy tale she'd once imagined as a girl. And now James was gone, and she was here, and Calder Rhodes was looking at her like she hung the moon and stars. What did she want? That was the question she'd been avoiding, but Clara's innocent wisdom had forced her to confront it. Did she want to spend the next 7 years as Calder's employee and nothing more, maintaining proper distance and appropriate boundaries? Did she want to keep her heart locked away in grief and caution, afraid to risk feeling anything for fear of being hurt again? Or did she want to be brave? Did she want to take the terrifying, exhilarating step towards something new? Marina didn't have an answer yet, but she was starting to realize that the question itself was important, that asking it meant she was healing, moving forward, choosing life instead of just surviving it. The answer came sooner than she expected, though not in any way she could have anticipated. It was a Tuesday morning in early August when Marina heard the commotion from the barn, raised voices and what sounded like someone in pain. She was in the middle of kneading bread dough, but she wiped her hands on her apron and hurried outside, her heart already racing with worry. A small crowd had gathered near the barn, ranch hands, Dutch, and Calder, all clustered around something on the ground. As Marina drew closer, she realized with a sick jolt that the something was someone, a man lying in the dirt, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, his face twisted in agony. "What happened?" she demanded, pushing through the crowd. "Horse spooked and kicked him," Dutch said grimly. "It's bad, Mrs. Doyle. Real bad." The injured man was one of the younger ranch hands, a boy named Sam, who couldn't have been more than 16. His leg was clearly broken, the bone visible through a tear in his pants, and he was going into shock. His skin pale and clammy, his breathing shallow and rapid. "We need to get him to the doctor in town," one of the other men said. "But it's a 3-hour ride, and I don't know if he'll make it that long without dying from blood loss or shock," Marina finished. She'd seen injuries like this before, had helped her mother tend to them back when she was growing up on a farm where accidents were common and doctors were far away. "We need to stabilize the leg before we move him, or the broken bone will tear through the artery and he'll bleed out before we get halfway to town." Everyone turned to stare at her. Calder's eyes met hers across the injured boy, and she saw surprise there, but also trust. "Can you do it?" he asked simply. Marina swallowed hard. "I can try, but I'll need supplies. Clean cloth for bandages, straight boards for a splint, whiskey or something strong for the pain, and someone to hold him still because this is going to hurt like hell." "You heard her," Calder said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the men. "Tommy, get the medical supplies from the house. Pike, find me the straightest boards you can. Dutch, bring the whiskey from my office. Move." The men scattered. Marina knelt beside Sam, placing a gentle hand on his forehead. "Sam, can you hear me?" The boy's eyes rolled toward her, unfocused with pain. "Hurts," he gasped. "Hurts so bad, Mrs. Doyle." "I know, honey, I know it does. But I'm going to help you, all right? I'm going to fix your leg so we can get you to town safely. But first, I need you to take some deep breaths for me. Can you do that?" Sam tried, his chest heaving. Calder moved to kneel on the boy's other side, and without being asked, he took Sam's hand in his own. "Squeeze my hand," Calder told him. "Hard as you need to. I've got you." By the time the supplies arrived, Marina had assessed the injury and formed a plan. It wasn't good. The break was compound, meaning the bone had pierced through the skin and there was significant bleeding. But if she could stabilize it and stop the worst of the bleeding, Sam had a chance. All right, she said, looking up at the circle of worried faces. Calder, Dutch, I need you two to hold him still. One at the shoulders, one at the hips. The rest of you, either help or give us room to work. This boy's life depends on what happens in the next few minutes. What followed was 30 minutes of the most intense, focused work Marina had ever done. She cleaned the wound as best she could with the supplies at hand, knowing that infection was almost as deadly as blood loss. She manipulated the broken bone back into alignment, a process that made Sam scream until his voice gave out and Calder had to fight to keep him from thrashing. She applied the splint with hands that shook from adrenaline but never wavered in their purpose. And through it all, she talked, to Sam, to herself, to God, maintaining a steady stream of words that seemed to anchor everyone through the crisis. You're doing so well, Sam. Just a little more, just hold on a little longer. That's it. You're so brave. Just breathe. Keep breathing. I've got you. We've all got you. When it was finally done, when the leg was splinted and bandaged and the bleeding had slowed to a manageable level, Marina sat back on her heels and discovered that she was shaking all over. Sam had passed out somewhere in the middle of the procedure, which was probably a mercy. His face was deathly pale, but his breathing had steadied, and his pulse, when Marina checked it, was stronger than before. Will he make it? Dutch asked quietly. I don't know, Marina said honestly, but he's got a better chance now than he did 10 minutes ago. We need to get him to town, though, soon as possible. I'll take him, Calder said immediately. We'll use the wagon, make him as comfortable as we can. Dutch, you're in charge while I'm gone. Mrs. Doyle. He looked at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. You just saved that boy's life. Maybe, Marina said, or maybe I just delayed the inevitable. We won't know until... You saved his life, Calder repeated firmly, and I've never seen anything braver or more capable in all my days. Thank you. They loaded Sam carefully into the wagon, cushioning him with blankets and securing the splint so it wouldn't shift during the journey. Marina gave Calder careful instructions for the doctor, what she'd done, what she was worried about, what to watch for on the journey. And then the wagon was rolling out of the yard, carrying the unconscious boy toward town and whatever fate awaited him there. Marina stood watching until they disappeared from sight, only then becoming aware that her apron and dress were covered in blood. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably, and she was on the verge of either laughing or crying or possibly both. Mrs. Doyle? Tommy, the young red-headed ranch hand, approached her hesitantly. I've never seen anything like that. Sam's lucky you were here. I just did what needed doing, Marina said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. No, ma'am. You did more than that. You were calm and sure when the rest of us were panicking. You knew what to do. If it had been up to us... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. If it had been up to them, Sam would have died. The reality of it hit Marina all at once. The weight of what had just happened, the responsibility she'd taken on, the life that had been in her hands. Her knees went weak, and she would have fallen if Dutch hadn't suddenly been there, his hand firm under her elbow. Easy there, he said gently. It's all right. The hard part's over. You did good, Mrs. Doyle. Real good. I need to... Marina gestured vaguely toward the house. The children. I need to check on the children. And I should clean up. I'm covered in... She looked down at her blood-stained hands and felt bile rise in her throat. I'll check on the young ones, Dutch assured her. You go get yourself cleaned up and take a moment to breathe. Nobody's expecting you to work the rest of the day after what you just went through. But Marina shook her head. No, I need to stay busy. If I stop moving, I'll start thinking. And if I start thinking... She didn't finish the sentence, but Dutch seemed to understand. All right then, but at least wash up first. And maybe change that dress before the children see it and get scared. Marina did as he suggested, walking on numb legs back to the cabin. She found the children playing peacefully, Jonah napping in a patch of sunlight on the porch, Clara tending her garden, Elias helping repair a fence post under the supervision of one of the ranch hands. They hadn't seen what happened. They didn't know how close someone had come to dying today. Marina washed in cold water from the basin, scrubbing the blood from her hands until her skin was raw. She changed into a clean dress, pinned up her hair with trembling fingers, and tried to calm the racing of her heart. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sam's pale face, heard his screams, felt the sickening give of bone moving under her hands. She'd done medical work before, helped her mother tend injuries and illnesses on their farm, but she'd been a girl then, following instructions, never bearing the full weight of responsibility. This was different. Today, a young man's life had been in her hands, and she'd had to make decisions that could mean the difference between his survival and his death. The responsibility of it was crushing. Marina returned to the main house and threw herself into work with almost manic intensity. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, organized cupboards that didn't need organizing, baked bread they didn't need. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from dwelling on the morning's events. It was late afternoon when Elias found her in the kitchen, furiously polishing silverware that didn't need polishing. "Mama?" His voice was worried. "Are you all right? Dutch said something happened with Sam, and you helped him, but you've been acting strange ever since." Marina set down the cloth and the spoon she'd been polishing. "I'm fine, baby. Just a long day." "You're not fine," Elias said with the blunt honesty of childhood. "You're scared, I can tell." Marina looked at her 7-year-old son, at the wisdom and concern in his young face, and felt something inside her crack. She sank into a chair and pulled Elias close, burying her face in his hair. "You're too perceptive for your own good," she whispered. "Did Sam die?" Elias asked quietly. "No. At least not when Mr. Rhodes took him to town. But he was badly hurt, and I had to help him, and I'm not sure if I did enough. I'm not sure if he'll be all right." "But you tried," Elias said. "That's what matters, right? You tried to help him. That's what you always tell us, that we should try to help people when they need it." Marina pulled back to look at her son. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart," Elias said, echoing his sister's words from a few days before. "You just don't always notice because you're busy worrying about everything." A laugh escaped Marina, surprised and a little watery, but genuine. "You and your sister are going to be the death of me with your wisdom." "Clara's wise?" Elias made a face. "She still thinks you can talk to plants and make them grow better." "Well, maybe you can," Marina said, smoothing his hair. "Your father used to say that plants could feel kindness, just like people." They sat together for a moment, mother and son, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Then Elias spoke again. "Mama, if Sam doesn't make it, it won't be your fault. You know that, right?" Marina felt tears prick her eyes. "I hope you're right, baby. I really hope you're right." Calder didn't return until well after dark. Marina had put the children to bed and was sitting on the cabin porch, unable to settle, when she saw the wagon rolling into the yard. She was on her feet immediately, her heart in her throat, trying to read the answer in the shadows and the sound of hoofbeats. Calder climbed down from the wagon slowly, moving like a man who'd aged a decade in a day. Marina met him halfway across the yard, unable to wait any longer. "Is he—" she started but couldn't finish. "He's alive," Calder said, and the relief that flooded through Marina nearly buckled her knees. "Doctor said it was touch and go for a while, but the leg's set and wrapped properly now, and Sam's young and strong. Doctor thinks he'll pull through, though he'll be laid up for months." "Oh, thank God," Marina breathed. "Thank God." "The doctor wanted me to tell you something," Calder continued. "He said that the work you did, stabilizing the leg, stopping the bleeding, that's what saved Sam's life. Said if we'd tried to move him without doing that first, he would have bled out before we got him halfway to town. He called what you did remarkably skilled medical intervention, which I think is doctor talk for you're a miracle worker." Marina shook her head. "I just did what needed to be done. Anyone would have—" "No," Calder interrupted. "Not anyone. Most people would have panicked or frozen or made things worse by trying to help without knowing what they were doing. You stayed calm. You knew exactly what needed to happen, and you did it, even though you were terrified." "How did you know I was terrified?" Marina asked. "Because I was watching your face," Calder said simply. "I saw the fear in your eyes, saw your hands shaking, but you did it anyway. That's what courage is, Marina. Not the absence of fear, but doing what needs to be done despite it." They stood there in the darkness, the space between them charged with something Marina couldn't quite name. The ranch was quiet. The animals settled for the night, the hands in the bunkhouse. The world reduced to just the two of them standing in the yard under a sky full of stars. I was so scared, Marina admitted quietly. I kept thinking, what if I make it worse? What if I do something wrong and he dies because of me? The responsibility of it, of holding someone's life in your hands, it's terrifying. But you did it anyway, Calder repeated. And that's just one more reason why. He stopped, shook his head. Never mind. It's late, and you've been through enough today. One more reason why what? Marina pressed. Calder looked at her for a long moment, and even in the darkness she could feel the intensity of his gaze. One more reason why I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly. Why I think about you from the moment I wake up to the moment I fall asleep. Why the idea of spending the next 7 years with you as just my employee feels impossible. Why I want... He broke off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. But I promised I wouldn't pressure you. I promised to give you time. Marina's heart was hammering so hard she was surprised he couldn't hear it. Calder, it's all right, he said, stepping back. You don't have to say anything. I shouldn't have brought it up tonight, not after the day you've had. Seeing you today, watching you save that boy's life with such courage and skill and compassion, it made me realize that I can't keep pretending what I feel is going to fade. It's only getting stronger. He turned to go, but Marina's voice stopped him. I'm scared, she said, of this, of you, of what I'm starting to feel. James has only been gone 8 months. What kind of woman starts having feelings for another man so soon after her husband dies? Calder turned back to face her. A human one, he said gently. A living one. Marina, I can't tell you what's right or wrong, what's too soon or not soon enough. All I know is that life is short and uncertain. Sam learned that today. Your husband learned it when the cholera took him. I learned it when my mother was sold away from me and I never saw her again. We don't get guarantees about tomorrow, so all we can do is make the most of today. But what if I'm not ready? Marina whispered. What if I can't be what you need me to be? You already are, Calder said. You're strong and brave and kind. You're a wonderful mother. You work harder than anyone I've ever met. You saved a boy's life today with your bare hands and your courage. You're everything I need, Marina. The question is, am I what you need? Marina looked at him, really looked at him, at the strong lines of his face, weathered by sun and wind and hard work, at the gray eyes that watched her with such open honesty, at the hands that had held a terrified boy steady while she worked to save his life, at the man who had stepped forward on an auction block and said, I'll take all 4, when he could have walked away. And she realized that somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, she'd started to fall in love with him too. I don't know if I'm ready, she said honestly, but I think I want to try, to see what this could be. If you're willing to be patient with me, if you understand that I'm going to be scared and uncertain and probably make mistakes along the way. The smile that broke across Calder's face was like sunrise, slow and warm and full of promise. I can be patient, he said. I can be anything you need me to be, as long as you're willing to give us a chance. I am, Marina said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. I am willing. Calder closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, those rough, calloused hands that were somehow so gentle, and looked into her eyes with such tenderness that it made her want to cry. May I kiss you? He asked softly. Marina nodded, not trusting her voice, and then his lips were on hers, warm and firm and tasting of coffee and promise. It was a gentle kiss, restrained, asking rather than demanding. But beneath the gentleness was heat, passion held carefully in check out of respect for her hesitation. When they finally pulled apart, Marina was breathless and dizzy and more certain than she'd been about anything in a very long time. Oh, she whispered. Yeah, Calder agreed, his voice rough. Oh. They stood there, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, and Marina felt something inside her chest bloom open, like Clara's garden flowers reaching for the sun. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and right in a way she hadn't expected to feel again. I should go, she said reluctantly. The children. I know. Calder stepped back, though his hand lingered on her cheek for just a moment longer. But Marina, thank you. For today. For saving Sam. And for this. For being brave enough to give us a chance. Marina walked back to the cabin on shaking legs, her lips still tingling from that kiss, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. She checked on the sleeping children, all three of them peaceful and safe, and then lay down in bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. Everything had changed today. Sam's injury had forced her to confront her own strength, her own capability, and Calder's kiss had forced her to confront her own heart, her own desires. She was falling in love with him, had probably been falling for weeks now, even if she'd refused to admit it. And instead of terrifying her, that realization filled her with hope. The days that followed took on a new quality, softer somehow, brighter, full of potential. Calder and Marina still maintained appropriate distance in front of the ranch hands and the children, still functioned in their respective roles as employer and employee. But now there were stolen moments, a brief touch of hands when he passed her a plate, a lingering look across the dinner table, quiet conversations on the porch after the children were asleep. They talked about everything, their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Calder told her about his mother, about the pain of losing her, about how it had shaped him into a man who valued family and loyalty above all else. Marina told him about James, about the good and the bad, about the guilt she sometimes felt for moving on so soon. "It's not betraying him to be happy," Calder assured her one evening as they sat side by side on the porch steps. "It's honoring the life you have, the life he'd want you to live." "That's what Clara said," Marina admitted. "My 5-year-old daughter is apparently wiser than I am." "Children often are," Calder said with a slight smile. "They haven't learned to complicate things the way we adults do." As August progressed, the ranch settled back into its routines. Sam was recovering well in town, according to the reports Calder brought back from his weekly trips. The storm damage was fully repaired. The horses were thriving, and several of the mares were pregnant, which meant Calder's breeding program was successful. And the household ran more smoothly than it ever had. Marina's touch was everywhere. In the organized pantry, the clean windows, the meals that appeared like clockwork, the mended clothes and polished furniture, and general sense of comfort that permeated the house. The ranch hands noticed too, often commenting that the place finally felt like a home again, instead of just a building where men slept and ate. It was Clara who noticed the change in her mother first, commenting one morning while Marina braided her hair that Mama seemed lighter somehow, like you're not carrying such heavy things anymore. Marina had hugged her daughter and said nothing, but she knew it was true. The crushing weight of grief and fear that had pressed down on her for months was slowly lifting, replaced by something that felt dangerously like joy. The children had noticed the growing connection between Marina and Calder too, though they reacted in different ways. Clara was delighted, often engineering reasons for her mother and Calder to be in the same place at the same time. Jonah, too young to fully understand, simply accepted Calder as a fixed presence in their lives, following him around and calling him Mr. Cal in his small voice. But Elias was struggling. Marina could see it in the way he'd go quiet when Calder was around, in the sudden distance he'd created between himself and the man he'd once followed everywhere. It came to a head one evening when Marina found him sitting alone behind the barn, tears streaming down his face. "Elias, baby, what's wrong?" She sat beside him, pulling him close. "Are you going to marry him?" Elias asked bluntly. "Mr. Rhodes?" Marina's breath caught. We haven't talked about marriage, Elias. Why would you think—" "I see how you look at each other," Elias said, his voice thick with tears. "I'm not stupid, Mama. I know what it means when people look at each other that way. And I know he's good to us. I know he saved us. But if you marry him, does that mean we're supposed to forget Papa?" "Oh, sweetheart." Marina's heart broke a little. "No, never. You could never forget your Papa, and I would never want you to. Your father loved you so much, Elias. He'll always be your father, no matter what happens." "But if Mr. Rhodes becomes our new Papa, he won't replace your father," Marina said firmly. "Nobody could do that. But Elias, people can love more than one person in their lives. The love I had for your father doesn't disappear just because he's gone. It's still here." She pressed her hand to her heart. "It's still real and important and part of who I am. But that doesn't mean I can't also have feelings for someone new. Does that make sense? Elias was quiet for a long moment, his face scrunched up in thought. I guess so, he finally said. I don't want to forget him, Mama. You won't, Marina promised. We won't. We'll tell stories about him, remember the good times, honor his memory. And if Mr. Rhodes and I do end up together, if that's what happens, then you'll have someone else who cares about you too. Not a replacement, but an addition. Someone else to help carry the weight, to keep us all safe. He is nice to us, Elias admitted grudgingly, and he knows a lot about horses, and he never gets mad when I ask questions. He is all those things, Marina agreed, but you don't have to like him, Elias. You don't have to want this if it makes you uncomfortable. Your feelings matter too. Elias looked up at her with his father's green eyes. Do you love him, Mama, the way you loved Papa? Marina took a deep breath. I think I'm starting to. It's different from what I felt for your father. We were so young when we married, and our life together was different. But yes, I think I'm falling in love with Calder. He's a good man, Elias, and he cares about you children almost as much as I do. Almost? Elias asked with the ghost of a smile. Well, nobody could care about you as much as I do, Marina said, tapping his nose gently. That's impossible, but he comes pretty close. Elias was quiet again, processing. Then he said, I think Papa would like him. Mr. Rhodes, I mean. Papa always said he wanted us to be taken care of if something happened to him. I think he'd be glad someone like Mr. Rhodes found us. Marina pulled her son into a tight embrace, fighting back tears. I think you're right, baby. I think he would be glad. That conversation marked a turning point. Elias gradually warmed back up to Calder, though he remained more reserved than before, watching their interactions with the careful attention of a child who'd learned too early that the world could change in an instant. But he was trying, and that was enough. It was in early September, as the prairie grass turned gold, and the air began to carry the first hints of autumn's chill, that tragedy struck again. Marina was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the commotion, horses galloping into the yard faster than they should, men shouting, an undertone of panic that made her blood run cold. She dropped the spoon she'd been holding and ran for the door. In the yard, Dutch was climbing down from his horse, his face ashen. Tommy and Pike were with him, both looking shaken, and strapped across another horse was a body covered with a blanket. No, Marina breathed. Oh God, no. Who? It's Mrs. Henderson's daughter, Dutch said, his voice rough with grief. Emily. She was staying in the old Henderson place, what was left of it after the storm. Didn't realize anyone was living there. She must have tried to patch it up herself, make it livable, but the roof gave way. She was inside when it collapsed. Marina pressed a hand to her mouth, horror and grief washing over her. Mrs. Henderson had been the previous housekeeper, the one who'd died just before Marina arrived. Her daughter Emily had been mentioned occasionally, a woman in her 40s who'd been living in town, estranged from her mother for reasons nobody seemed to know. Is she? Marina couldn't finish the question. Dead, Dutch said flatly. Been dead for a few hours at least by the time we found her. Went looking when one of the neighboring ranchers mentioned seeing smoke from a chimney in the old Henderson place. Found her trapped under the collapsed beam, already gone. Calder emerged from the barn, took one look at the scene, and his face went hard. Get her down from there, he ordered. Bring her to the house. Mrs. Doyle will need... I'll prepare a room, Marina said immediately, already moving toward the house. We can't leave her in the barn like an animal. She deserves dignity. They laid Emily Henderson out in one of the upstairs bedrooms, and Marina cleaned her as best she could, washing away the dust and blood, arranging her hands peacefully across her chest. It was grim work, but necessary work, and Marina did it with the same focus and care she'd shown when treating Sam's injury. When it was done, when Emily was as presentable as possible, Marina stood beside the bed and said a quiet prayer for a woman she'd never met. A woman who'd died alone in a broken-down house, estranged from family, trying to make a home in the ruins of her mother's legacy. It was a stark reminder of how quickly life could change, how fragile existence really was. That night, after the undertaker had been summoned from town, after the ranch hands had returned to their normal routines, after the children were safely in bed with no knowledge of the day's tragedy, Marina found Calder sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the darkness. She sat beside him without speaking, simply offering her presence. After a long moment, he reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Life's short," he said quietly. "Too short to waste time being careful and cautious and afraid." "I know," Marina said. "I've been thinking about something," Calder continued. "About us. About what I want for the future." Marina's heart began to race. "What have you been thinking?" Calder turned to face her, his storm gray eyes serious in the moonlight. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not 7 years from now when your contract's up. Now, soon. Marry me and let me be a father to your children. Let me love you openly instead of in stolen moments. Let me give you the life you deserve, not as my employee but as my wife, my partner, my equal." Marina's breath caught. "Calder, that's a big step. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. "I know it's fast. I know people will talk. But Marina, today proves something to me. Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It doesn't care if we think it's too soon or what people might say. Emily Henderson died alone in a broken house, and it made me realize I don't want to waste another day pretending I don't want to spend the rest of my life with you." Tears were streaming down Marina's face now. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," Calder admitted. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. So what do you say, Marina Doyle? Will you marry me?" Marina looked at this man, this rough, kind, honest man who'd saved her and her children, who'd given them a home and dignity and hope. She thought about James, about the life they'd had, and the grief she'd carried. She thought about her children, about the future she wanted for them. And she thought about herself, about the woman she was becoming, about the courage it took to say yes to love after loss. "Yes," she said, the word coming out strong and sure despite her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Calder's smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious face into something almost boyish with joy. He pulled her into his arms, and this time when he kissed her, there was nothing restrained about it. It was passionate and tender and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, Marina said, "The children, we need to tell them. And we need to figure out when and how soon," Calder said firmly. "As soon as we can arrange it. I don't want to wait, Marina. I've waited long enough." "Soon," Marina agreed and felt joy bubble up in her chest, bright and warm and entirely unexpected. Life was short and uncertain and sometimes cruel. But sometimes, if you were brave enough to reach for it, it was also beautiful. And Marina Doyle, who'd stood on an auction block 8 weeks ago, certain she'd lost everything, was finally brave enough to believe she deserved that beauty. The morning after Calder's proposal, Marina woke before dawn with her heart racing and a mixture of terror and exhilaration coursing through her veins. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the peaceful breathing of her children, and tried to process the enormity of what she'd agreed to. She was going to marry Calder Rhodes. She was going to become his wife, and he was going to become a father to her children. The life she'd thought was over just 2 months ago was beginning again, in a way she'd never expected. But first, they had to tell the children. Marina rose quietly, dressed, and started her morning routine with hands that trembled slightly. By the time the children woke, she had breakfast ready and was trying to calm her nerves with deep breaths and silent prayers. Today would change everything, and she needed to do this right. "Mama, you're being funny again," Clara observed over her eggs. "All fluttery and distracted." "Did something happen?" "Actually, yes," Marina said, setting down her fork and looking at all 3 of her children. "Something very important happened, and I need to talk to you about it. All of you." Elias immediately went still, his eyes wary. Jonah kept eating, oblivious to the weight of the moment. Clara leaned forward, her blue eyes bright with curiosity. "Mr. Rhodes asked me to marry him," Marina said, deciding that simple and direct was best. "And I said yes." The silence that followed felt endless. Then Clara squealed with delight, bouncing in her chair so hard she nearly knocked over her milk. "Really? You're going to be married? Like in the stories, with a wedding and everything?" "Yes, sweet girl, with a wedding and everything." "Can I wear a pretty dress?" Clara demanded. "And flowers in my hair and—" "Clara, hush," Elias interrupted, his voice tight. He was staring at his mother with an expression that was hard to read. When? When is this happening? Soon, Marina said gently. Very soon. Mr. Rhodes and I don't want to wait. Because you love him? Elias asked, and there was something challenging in his tone. Yes, Marina said honestly. Because I love him, and because he loves me, and because he loves all of you too, even if he hasn't said it in so many words. He wants to be a family with us, Elias. A real family. We're already a real family, Elias said, his jaw set stubbornly. We don't need him to make us real. You're right, Marina agreed, keeping her voice calm. We are a real family, the four of us. But Elias, families can grow. They can include new people without erasing the old ones. Your father will always be your father. Nothing can change that. But Mr. Rhodes can be something too, not a replacement, but something additional. Someone who cares about you, who wants to help raise you, who wants to give you opportunities and safety and love. What if I don't want that? Elias's voice cracked, and Marina saw tears gathering in his eyes. What if I just want things to stay the way they are? Marina moved around the table and knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. I know change is scary, baby. I know you've been through so much already this year, and it feels like everything keeps shifting under your feet. But Elias, this is a good change. This is us building something solid, something permanent, a real home, not just a place we're staying until the contract runs out. But what if it doesn't work? Elias whispered. What if he changes his mind? What if he decides we're too much trouble and sends us away? He won't, Marina said firmly. That man bought us off an auction block when he could have walked away. He's fought fires with us, weathered storms with us, helped you learn about horses, praised Clara's garden, carried Jonah on his shoulders. He's not going to change his mind, Elias. He's committed to us. To all of us. How do you know? Elias challenged. Because I see the way he looks at you children, Marina said. I see the patience he shows, the care he takes, the pride in his eyes when you accomplish something. That's not something a man can fake, Elias. That's real. Elias was quiet for a long moment, his young face working through complicated emotions. Finally, he said, Can I still remember Papa? Can I still talk about him? Always, Marina promised. Always and forever. In fact, I think your Papa would be happy about this. I think he'd be relieved to know that someone good and strong was taking care of us. That's what I said, Clara piped up. I told Mama that Papa would want us to be happy. Elias looked at his sister, then back at his mother. I guess if it makes you happy, Mama, then it's okay. But I'm not calling him Papa. Not yet, anyway. Nobody's asking you to, Marina said, pulling him into a hug. You can call him Mr. Rhodes or Calder or anything you're comfortable with. The important thing is that we're all together and we're all safe. That's what matters. Over Elias's shoulder, Marina saw Jonah watching them with his big, solemn eyes. The 3-year-old didn't fully understand what was happening, but he sensed the emotion in the room. Mr. Cal? He asked in his small voice. Mr. Cal is staying. Yes, baby, Marina said, reaching out to include him in the embrace. Mr. Cal is staying. Forever. Good, Jonah said decisively, and went back to his breakfast as if that settled everything. Clara was already planning the wedding in her mind, chattering about flowers and dresses and whether there would be cake. Marina let her talk, grateful for her daughter's enthusiasm, even as she worried about Elias's quietness. But when she looked at her eldest son, she saw acceptance in his eyes, if not quite joy. It was enough. It would have to be enough. That evening, Calder came to the cabin after dinner, his hat in his hands and nervousness written across his face. Marina had told him she'd talk to the children that morning, and now he'd come to face them himself, to make his intentions clear, to answer their questions, to begin the process of becoming part of their family in truth as well as deed. Mr. Rhodes! Clara launched herself at him as soon as he walked through the door, wrapping her arms around his waist. Mama told us! We're going to have a wedding! Calder looked down at the little girl clinging to him, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. That's right. If it's all right with you children, I know this is a big change, and I wanted to talk to you about it. All of you. He looked at Marina, who nodded encouragingly. Calder cleared his throat and lowered himself into one of the chairs, bringing himself closer to the children's eye level. Clara immediately claimed the chair next to him. Jonah wandered over and leaned against Calder's knee with the unconscious trust of a child who'd never known cruelty. Only Elias hung back, watching warily. "I've asked your mother to marry me," Calder began, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes. "Because I love her. I know that might be hard to hear, especially for you, Elias, since your father hasn't been gone very long. But it's the truth, and I believe in being honest with people, even when it's complicated." "Mama said you love us too," Clara said. "Do you?" Calder didn't hesitate. "Yes, I do. Maybe that seems fast, but sometimes you just know. From the moment I saw you all on that auction block, something in me said, these are your people. These are the ones you're supposed to protect. And every day since then has only made me more certain." "What does that mean?" Elias asked, speaking for the first time. "Protect us? We're not babies who need protecting." "Everyone needs protecting sometimes," Calder said. "Even grown men like me. That's what families do. They protect each other, help each other, support each other. And that's what I want to do for you, not because you're weak or helpless, but because I care about you and I want to make your lives better." "How?" Elias challenged. "How would you make our lives better?" "Well," Calder said thoughtfully, "I'd make sure you always have a roof over your head and food in your belly. I'd teach you about horses and ranching, if you want to learn. I'd help you get an education. There's a school in town, and I'd make sure you could attend. I'd be there when you need someone to talk to, or when you need help with something. I'd celebrate your successes and help you through your failures. I'd be—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'd be someone you could count on. Always." "Like a father," Clara said softly. "If you want me to be," Calder agreed. "But I know I'm not your father. I know your papa was the good man, and I'm not trying to replace him. I'm just trying to be something additional, someone else in your corner." Elias was quiet for a long moment, his face scrunched up in thought. Then he said, "If we don't like you being married to Mama, what happens? Do you send us away?" "No," Calder said firmly. "Absolutely not. You're part of this family, Elias. That doesn't change whether you like me or not. You're stuck with me now, just like I'm stuck with you. That's what family means. You don't give up on each other just because things get hard or uncomfortable." "Even if I'm difficult?" Elias pressed. "Even if I don't want to call you Papa or do what you say, or—" "Even then," Calder interrupted gently, "though I hope we can find a way to get along. I think you and I could be good friends, Elias, if you give us a chance. You're smart and hardworking and brave. Those are qualities I respect. And I think your father would be proud of the man you're growing into." At the mention of his father, Elias's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't know him. You don't know what he'd think." "You're right," Calder acknowledged. "I didn't know him, but I know he loved you because your mother has told me so. And I know he'd want you to be happy and safe. So I'm asking you to give me a chance, Elias, not to replace your father, but to be someone who cares about you and wants good things for you. Can you do that?" Elias looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked back at Calder and said in a small voice, "I guess I can try." "That's all I'm asking," Calder said. "Just try. And if you have concerns or complaints, or you need to talk about something, you come to me directly. Deal?" Elias nodded slowly. "Deal." "Good." Calder held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Elias shook it, a solemn, grown-up gesture that made Marina's throat tighten with emotion. "Can I be in the wedding?" Clara asked, unable to contain herself any longer. "Please, I want to wear flowers and throw petals, and—" "You can absolutely be in the wedding," Calder assured her with a smile. "All three of you will be part of it. It's not just your mother and me getting married, it's all of us becoming a family together. That means you're just as important as we are." "When is it happening?" Clara demanded. "Soon," Calder said, looking at Marina. "We were thinking in about 3 weeks, if we can arrange it. There's a pastor in town who could perform the ceremony, and we could have a small gathering here at the ranch. Nothing fancy, just something simple and meaningful. Does that sound all right?" Marina nodded, her eyes bright with tears. "That sounds perfect." The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. There were arrangements to be made, though Calder was true to his word about keeping things simple. The pastor from the small church in Lawrence agreed to come out to the ranch to perform the ceremony. Dutch and the ranch hands threw themselves into preparations with surprising enthusiasm, cleaning and decorating the barn for the reception, planning a feast, even constructing an arbor from cottonwood branches and whatever flowers they could find on the prairie. Marina sewed a new dress for herself. Nothing fancy, just a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes, but it was clean and new and hers. She made new dresses for Clara too, and a new shirt for Elias and Jonah. The children were excited now, even Elias, who had gradually warmed to the idea as he watched Calder go out of his way to include them in everything. Word spread through the neighboring ranches, and to Marina's surprise, people wanted to come. The county harvest dance was scheduled for the week before the wedding, and Calder suggested they attend, not just to socialize, but to introduce Marina properly as his future wife, to show the community that she was more than just his housekeeper. Marina was nervous about the dance. She hadn't been to a social gathering since James died, and she worried about what people would say. A widow remarrying after only 8 months? Some would call it scandalous. Some would whisper that she'd been carrying on with Calder all along, that maybe the debts and the auction had been convenient excuses to fall into a wealthy rancher's arms. "Let them talk," Calder said when she voiced these concerns. "People always talk. What matters is the truth. That I saw a woman and her children in trouble, that I helped because it was the right thing to do, and that somewhere along the way, I fell in love. There's nothing shameful in that." "But what if they're cruel to the children?" Marina worried. What if someone says something that hurts them?" "Then I'll deal with it," Calder said firmly. "And so will you. Marina, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You can handle whatever anyone throws at you, and the children are resilient. They'll be fine." The night of the harvest dance arrived cool and clear, with autumn stars brilliant overhead. Marina dressed carefully in her new blue dress, pinned up her hair, and tried to calm her racing heart. The children were staying at the ranch with Dutch, who'd volunteered to watch them with surprising gentleness. It would be just Marina and Calder, facing the community together. The dance was held in the town hall, a large wooden structure that had been decorated with paper lanterns and bunting. As they walked in, conversation stuttered and stopped, heads turning to watch them enter. Marina felt the weight of dozens of eyes, heard the whispers starting, and had to fight the urge to turn and flee. But then Calder's hand was at her back, steady and warm, and his voice was low in her ear. "You're beautiful. You're strong. And you're mine. Let them look." The evening was awkward at first. Some people were friendly. Mrs. Thornhill, who'd bid on Marina at the auction, came over immediately to congratulate them. The doctor who'd treated Sam sought them out to thank Marina again for her quick thinking, but others were less kind. Marina heard the whispers, saw the judgmental looks, endured the subtle cuts that people could deliver with just a raised eyebrow or a turned back. It was Pike's wife who finally said something out loud. The woman, a sharp-featured, sour-faced creature named Judith, approached them at the refreshment table and said, loud enough for others to hear, "Well, Mrs. Doyle, I must say, you've certainly landed on your feet remarkably quickly, from the auction block to the altar in less than 3 months. Some might call that opportunistic." The words hung in the air like poison. Marina felt her face flush, felt the humiliation crawl up her spine. She opened her mouth to respond, though she had no idea what to say, when Calder stepped forward. "Mrs. Pike," he said, his voice cold as winter ice, "I'm going to give you one chance to apologize to my future wife, one chance to take back those words and walk away. Because if you don't, you and your husband are going to be looking for employment elsewhere. I don't tolerate cruelty on my ranch, and I certainly don't tolerate anyone insulting the woman I love." Judith Pike's face went white, then red. "You can't just—" "I can," Calder interrupted, "and I will. Now, do you have something to say to Mrs. Doyle?" The hall had gone silent. Everyone was watching. Judith looked around, realized she had no support, and muttered something that might have been an apology before hurrying away. Pike himself, who'd been standing nearby, gave Calder an apologetic nod and followed his wife. The tension broke. Conversation resumed, though more subdued now. And Marina realized that Calder had just drawn a line in the sand, had made it clear that she was under his protection, that anyone who wanted to hurt her would have to go through him first. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nothing to thank me for," Calder said. "You're going to be my wife. That means we stand together, always." As the evening progressed, more people approached to offer genuine congratulations. The story of how Marina had saved Sam's life had spread, and several ranchers made a point of thanking her, saying they'd sleep easier knowing someone with medical skills was in the area. By the time the dancing started, Marina was feeling more relaxed, more accepted. "Dance with me," Calder said, offering his hand. Marina hesitated. "I haven't danced since James died. I'm not sure I remember how." "Then I'll lead," Calder said simply. "Trust me." She took his hand and he led her onto the floor as the fiddlers struck up a waltz. For a moment, Marina stumbled, uncertain, but then Calder's arm was around her waist, strong and sure, and his hand was holding hers with gentle firmness. "Just follow me," he murmured, "one step at a time." They moved together, finding their rhythm, and Marina felt something in her chest loosen and expand. Around them, other couples danced, lantern light flickering across their faces. Someone was laughing. The fiddles sang. And in Calder's arms, Marina felt safe and cherished and finally home. "I love you," she said quietly, the words coming easily for the first time. "I know I haven't said it enough, but I do. I love you, Calder Rhodes." His smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious face. "I love you too, Marina. More than I knew it was possible to love someone. You and those children, you're my whole world now." They danced until the music ended, until other couples began to leave, until it was clear the evening was winding down. As they walked back to the wagon, Marina felt lighter than she had in months. The whispers and judgment still stung, but they mattered less now. What mattered was the man beside her, the children waiting at home, the family they were building together. The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in late September, under an arbor that Dutch and the ranch hands had constructed in the yard between the house and the barn. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, with a brilliant blue sky and the prairie grass golden in the autumn sun. The pastor stood waiting, his Bible in hand, while a small crowd of neighbors and friends gathered to witness. Marina stood in the cabin, her hands trembling as she pinned up her hair one more time. Clara was beside her in her new dress, practically vibrating with excitement. The little girl's hair was crowned with a wreath of prairie flowers, not exactly what she'd dreamed of, but close enough to delight her. "You look beautiful, Mama," Clara said solemnly, "like a princess in a story." "Thank you, sweet girl." Marina turned to look at her reflection in the small mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who'd stood on that auction block. This woman had color in her cheeks, brightness in her eyes, hope in her expression. This woman was loved. There was a knock at the door, and Elias poked his head in. "They're ready for you, Mama." Marina took a deep breath, smoothed down her dress, and stepped out into the golden afternoon. The children walked with her, Elias on one side, Clara on the other, Jonah holding her hand and trying to keep up. As they approached the arbor, Marina saw Calder waiting for her, and her breath caught. He was dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that looked new, a white shirt, a string tie. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, but it was his expression that undid her, the love and pride and joy written so clearly across his features that there could be no doubt about his feelings. The pastor began the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. But Marina barely heard the words. She was too focused on Calder's face, on his hands holding hers, on the steady presence of her children beside her. When it came time for vows, Calder spoke first. "Marina," he said, his voice steady and sure, "I promise to love you and honor you for all the days of my life. I promise to be a father to your children, to protect them and guide them and give them every opportunity I can. I promise to build a life with you, not perfect, but honest and true. I promise to stand with you through whatever comes, good or bad. And I promise that you will never again stand alone, never again face the world without someone at your side who loves you completely. This is my vow to you." Marina's vision blurred with tears. When it was her turn, she had to swallow hard before she could speak. "Calder," she said, her voice shaking but growing stronger. "You saved my life and the lives of my children when you had no reason to. You gave us shelter and dignity and hope when we had nothing. But more than that, you gave us love. You showed me that it's possible to heal, to trust again, to open my heart even after loss. I promise to love you faithfully, to be your partner in all things, to build this life with you one day at a time. I promise to honor what we're creating, not just a marriage, but a family. And I promise that you will always have a home in my heart, as you've given me a home here. This is my vow to you." "Then by the power vested in me," the pastor said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Calder, you may kiss your bride." Calder stepped forward, cupped Marina's face in his hands, and kissed her softly, a kiss full of promise and tenderness and the beginning of something beautiful. Around them, people cheered and clapped. Clara squealed with delight. Even Elias was smiling, his eyes bright with unshed tears. When they finally pulled apart, Calder turned to the children. "Come here," he said, "all of you." They gathered close, and Calder knelt so he was at their eye level. "Today isn't just about your mother and me," he said. "It's about all of us. We're a family now, officially and forever. And I want to make a promise to each of you too." He looked at Elias first. "I promise to teach you everything I know about ranching and horses and being a good man. I promise to listen when you need someone to talk to and to give you space when you need to figure things out on your own. I promise to respect your father's memory and never try to replace him. And I promise to always, always be proud of you." Elias nodded, his throat working. "Thank you," he whispered. Calder turned to Clara. "I promise to encourage your garden and your dreams. I promise to answer all your questions, even the ones that come at bedtime when I'm exhausted. I promise to make you laugh and catch you when you fall. And I promise that you'll always have flowers on your birthday, no matter what." Clara threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him over. "I love you, Mr. Rhodes." "I love you too, Clara Bell," Calder said, using the nickname he'd given her. He looked at Jonah last. "And you, little man. I promise to keep you safe and warm and fed. I promise to teach you about the horses when you're big enough. I promise to carry you when your legs get tired and to tell you stories at bedtime. And I promise that you'll never have to wonder if you belong, because you do. You belong with us." Jonah, not entirely understanding but responding to the emotion in Calder's voice, leaned forward and patted Calder's cheek with his small hand. "Mr. Cal," he said contentedly. Marina watched this scene through tears, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was it, the moment when they truly became a family, not because of legal contracts or employment arrangements, but because of love freely given and received. The reception that followed was joyful and chaotic. Dutch had organized a feast: roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from Clara's garden, and 3 different kinds of pie. The ranch hands played music, and people danced in the yard as the sun sank toward the horizon. Children ran shrieking through the crowd. Neighbors who'd been skeptical at the dance now offered genuine congratulations. Even Pike's wife managed a stiff smile and a nod. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Calder pulled Marina aside. "There's something I want to give you," he said. "A wedding present. Come with me." He led her to the barn where something large sat covered by a tarp. The children followed, curious, along with several of the ranch hands. Calder pulled off the tarp with a flourish, revealing a beautifully crafted sleigh, polished wood, curved runners, padded seats, and designs carved into the sides. "I've been working on it for weeks," Calder admitted. "Had to do it in secret, mostly late at night when everyone was asleep. Thought it might be nice for winter, for taking the family into town, or just for rides across the prairie when the snow comes. Something special for all of us to share." Marina stared at the sleigh, overwhelmed. "Calder, it's beautiful. But when did you have time to—" "I made time," he said simply. "Because you're worth it. Because this family is worth it. Because I want to build a life with you, Marina, full of ordinary moments and special ones. And this," he gestured to the sleigh, "this is for the special ones. For Christmas mornings and first snows and any other time, we want to remember that we chose this. That we chose each other." Marina threw her arms around him, not caring that people were watching, and kissed him soundly. Thank you, she whispered against his lips. For everything. For saving us. For loving us. For giving us a future. Thank you for saying yes, Calder murmured back. For taking a chance on a rough cowboy who had no business thinking someone like you could love him. I do love you, Marina said, more than I ever thought possible. The celebration continued long into the night. Marina danced with Calder, with Dutch, with several of the neighboring ranchers who wanted to welcome her properly to the community. The children played until they were exhausted, and one by one they fell asleep in various corners. Clara curled up on a hay bale, Jonah in Dutch's arms, even Elias eventually dozing off against the barn wall. As the last guest departed and the ranch hands headed to the bunkhouse, Marina and Calder gathered their sleeping children and carried them to the cabin. But at the door, Calder hesitated. Actually, he said, I was thinking, maybe tonight we put the children in the cabin and you come stay in the main house. With me. As my wife. Marina looked at the house. Her house now, as much as Calder's, and nodded. Let me get them settled first. Make sure they're comfortable and safe. Then I'll come to you. She tucked each child into bed with gentle hands and whispered prayers. Elias stirred as she kissed his forehead, his eyes opening sleepily. Mama? Is everything different now? Yes, baby, Marina said softly. Everything's different, but different in a good way. You're safe, Elias. We all are. And we're going to stay that way. Promise? Elias whispered. Promise, Marina said firmly. Now sleep. Tomorrow's a new day, and we'll face it together. She left a lamp burning low and walked across the yard to the main house, where Calder waited on the porch. The night was cool and clear, stars brilliant overhead, and Marina felt peace settle into her bones. This was home. This was family. This was the life she'd never dared to dream of when she'd stood on that auction block, certain she was losing everything. Calder took her hand and led her inside, up the stairs to the room that would now be theirs. And as he closed the door behind them, as he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness of a new husband, Marina sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For second chances, for unexpected salvation, for a cowboy who'd looked at a desperate woman with 3 children and said, I'll take all 4. For love that came when she'd stopped looking for it, stronger and truer than anything she'd known before. The months that followed brought changes, as all new beginnings do. The children adjusted to their new life with varying degrees of ease. Clara immediately and joyfully, Jonah without really understanding that anything had changed, and Elias more slowly but with growing acceptance. The ranch hands got used to calling Marina Mrs. Rhodes instead of Mrs. Doyle, though Dutch still sometimes slipped and called her ma'am, with a twinkle in his eye that suggested he was doing it on purpose. Winter came early that year, blanketing the prairie in snow by mid-November. And on Christmas Eve, Calder kept his promise about the sleigh. He bundled Marina and the children into it, wrapped them in warm blankets and buffalo robes, and drove them across the snow-covered ranch land under a sky full of stars. Clara shrieked with delight. Jonah clapped his hands and laughed. Even Elias smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. And Marina sat beside her husband, watching her children's joy, and felt such happiness that it was almost painful. Thank you, she whispered to Calder over the children's excited chatter. For what? He asked, though his smile said he knew. For this, for all of it, for choosing us. Marina, Calder said, pulling the sleigh to a stop and turning to face her, I didn't choose you. I found you. There's a difference. You were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. I'm convinced of that now. Everything that happened, all the pain and loss and struggle, it brought us to that auction block at exactly the right moment, and I'd do it all again every single day if it meant ending up here with you and these children. Marina kissed him then, soft and sweet, while the children made exaggerated gagging sounds and complained about grown-ups being mushy. And when they finally pulled apart, Calder cracked the reins and sent the sleigh flying across the snow, carrying them home through the winter night. Years later, when the children were grown and the story had been told and retold around countless dinner tables, people would ask Marina about that day on the auction block. They'd want to know what she'd felt, what she'd thought, whether she'd had any idea that the dusty cowboy pushing through the crowd would change her life forever. And Marina would smile and say that no, she hadn't known. She'd been too terrified, too focused on keeping her children close, too certain that she was losing everything that mattered. But she'd learned something that day, something that had shaped the rest of her life. She'd learned that salvation could come from unexpected places, that families could be built by choice as much as by blood. That love didn't follow rules or timelines or proper waiting periods, and that sometimes, when you'd lost everything and were standing on the edge of despair, someone might step forward and offer you not just rescue, but a second chance at life itself. Calder Rhodes had been that someone for her. The cowboy who'd looked at a desperate widow and her 3 children and seen not a burden, but a blessing. The man who'd paid more than they were worth so they could stay together. The husband who'd kept every promise he'd made on their wedding day, and then some. And Marina Doyle, now Marina Rhodes, had learned to be brave enough to accept that gift, to open her heart again after loss, to trust in the possibility of happiness, to build a life that honored her past while embracing her future. On that Christmas Eve, riding through the snow in the sleigh her husband had built with his own hands, surrounded by her children's laughter and her husband's love, Marina understood with perfect clarity that she was exactly where she was meant to be. They'd been sold, all 4 of them, on a hot August day in 1858, but they hadn't been bought by just anyone. They'd been claimed by the one man who would love them, protect them, and give them a home that was more than walls and a roof, a home that was built on foundation of respect and partnership and deep, abiding love. And that, Marina thought, as the sleigh carried them through the starlit night toward the warm lights of home, was the greatest gift of all. The end.